Chapter 364. Rain moistens all things and nourishes the common people. In this bleak and cold late autumn, a sudden downpour instantly extinguished everyone's rising spirits because of the National Day holiday. Heavy rain was always accompanied by strong winds, and this was the north. When the heavy rain came down, it immediately drenched people from top to bottom. On the streets of the capital, people hid under the eaves and shivered. Everyone was hoping that the rain would stop, but they didn't know that. This rain, it was actually a blessing bestowed by God to all things. From the moment the rain started to fall, the big cat was like a clockwork doll that had been activated, running wildly in the rain. Big Head, who had always been trapped in the fish tank and couldn't go anywhere, jumped out of the fish tank like a fish leaping through the dragon gate. Then, through his own hard struggle, he finally jumped into the heavy rain. For most children, being in the rain was always a very fun thing to do, and the three little guys were no exception. At first, the brothers were a little restrained because Gu Lao was present. However, Nian looked back at Qin Shi and found that her parents' attention was on the sky. She rushed into the heavy rain and then jumped around the yard with the big cat. She stepped on the water in the yard like a Peppa Pig who liked to step on mud. Her little face was full of excited smiles. The rain drenched her hair, and the line of water almost blurred her eyes, but this made her even happier. Under the constant urging of the little guy, the brothers finally couldn't resist the temptation. The two glanced at Gu Lao, who had just rushed up the steps to hide from the rain, and then jumped into the heavy rain like a wisp of smoke. In the heavy rain in the yard, the three little guys laughed happily. At this time, Gu Lao suddenly came back to his senses. But when he was about to scold the brothers, Qin Shi's voice suddenly sounded in his ear. "Let them play for a while. A little rain won't be a problem. There's heating at home. If it's cold, they'll know to come back." Seeing how happy the three children were, coupled with Qin Shi's persuasion, Gu Lao's lips moved a few times, but in the end he didn't interrupt them. The heavy rain poured down, washing away the hustle and bustle of the entire city. It was as if the only sound left in the world was the sound of the rain. It was a feast and a carnival. Under Qin Shi's signal, Qin Ring also walked into the heavy rain step by step. Shangjing rarely rained, so there was a lot of dust and impurities accumulated in the clouds. When it landed on one's body, there was a sticky feeling. But today's rain was different. Although it was a little cold, the rainwater was exceptionally clear and pure, giving people a comfortable feeling all over their bodies. Spiritual energy turned into rain. Even for Qin Shi, this was the first time he had seen such a situation. For a moment, he couldn't help but walk into the rain and began to wantonly plunder the spiritual energy. Rain after a long drought is truly a blessing in life. However, just when everyone was celebrating because of the rain, Qin Ruing suddenly felt her legs go soft and she staggered. If Qin Shi hadn't caught her in time, she would have fallen into the puddles on the ground. "Ying? What's wrong?" "My head is a little dizzy." Qin Ruing covered her forehead. Her originally rosy face was stained with a layer of white frost, looking as if she was sick. At this time, Qin Xueqing also seemed to feel something and couldn't help but blurt out to Qin Shi, "It's here again, that feeling." After saying that, even she covered her forehead with a look of discomfort. Qin Xueqing was already a celestial, but even she was so uncomfortable, one could imagine what kind of experience Qin Ruing was experiencing at this moment. Qin Shi nervously supported Qin Ruing, and at the same time constantly poured his true essence into her, trying to ease her symptoms. But why did she feel dizzy? Qin Shi seriously considered all the possibilities. Suddenly, a thought flashed through Qin Shi's mind. It wasn't the first time Qin Ruing felt dizzy. Whenever this happened, it must be when the tide of spiritual energy was surging. Was it because of the tide of spiritual energy? It obviously wasn't. The spiritual energy of heaven and earth was always the most important thing to cultivators, so how could it cause discomfort? Since natural factors were ruled out, only man-made factors were left. In addition to the information he had obtained on Daiyu Island, Qin Shi could almost conclude that this definitely had something to do with the sky-bearing technique and the floating dawn mirror. If he guessed correctly, such a huge tide of spiritual energy had appeared on Earth, so the people behind the divine gate wanted to use it to open the divine gate. But because he had already destroyed the 5 holy temples, the divine gate hadn't been opened. The divine gate, the holy temples, the tide of spiritual energy, Si Ming Xian knew, the sky-bearing technique and the floating dawn mirror, everything was actually closely related. Just as Qin Shi was pondering the root of the problem, Qin Ruoying seemed to have suddenly seen something. She looked up at the sky and muttered, I see it. There are people in the sky. They want to come down." As soon as she finished speaking, her body went limp and she completely fainted. Ying. The sudden change really shocked Qin Shi. He almost instantly carried Qin Ruoying back to the west wing. Looking at the unconscious Qin Ruoying lying on the bed, Qin Shi's mood fell to the bottom. At this moment, Qin Xueqing also rushed into the west wing. Then she said to Qin Shi with a pained expression, "I saw someone holding a mirror, and then he kept talking to the mirror. I could hear his voice, but I couldn't hear what he was saying at all." Qin Xueqing's expression was very pained. She looked like she was drunk, and she was trembling as she walked. "Mirror?" Qin Shi repeated this word. When he was about to ask, Qin Xueqing shook her head and muttered, "I can't, my head is so dizzy. Let me sleep for a while." After saying that, she fell on the bed and lay side by side with Qin Ruoying. Looking at the 2 sisters who had fainted on the bed, Qin Shi was silent. He carefully checked the physical condition of the 2 and found that their physiological functions were all normal. There were no signs of disorder in the vital essence in their bodies. It was as if they were sleeping peacefully. After a long while, when Qin Shi was sure that the 2 of them were not in any danger, he gently kissed Qin Ruoying's forehead. Then he got up and walked out of the west wing. It was still raining heavily outside. The 3 little guys were still jumping excitedly in the rain. Qin Shi subconsciously glanced in the direction of the main hall, but just happened to meet Qin Yongyan's gaze. Obviously, his father-in-law also noticed something strange. But due to his limited ability, he could only put all his hopes on Qin Shi. Qin Shi nodded slightly at Qin Yongyan. Then Chapter 365. Above the sky, amidst the dark clouds, Qin Shi silently sensed all the tiny movements around him. A massive spirit energy tide that he had never seen or heard of before was surging wantonly in front of his eyes. It was only at this moment that Qin Shi suddenly realized the area covered by this rain was too large. If one stood on the moon and looked at the earth, they could clearly see the entire northeastern hemisphere was shrouded in huge cloud cyclones one after another. From the Malay archipelago in the south to Siberia in the north, almost half of Asia was covered by these huge cloud cyclones. The center of each cyclone was the place with the densest spirit energy. At a rough count, there were at least 7 or 8 cyclones. There was one in Shangjing, one in Qinling, one in Donghai, one in Karakoram, one in Taklamakan. Everywhere that had appeared before, a spirit energy tide appeared at the same time today. In other words, if the divine gate suddenly opened, it would definitely appear in these places. Usually, it would come one by one, but today, so many appeared at the same time. What was the secret behind it? Qin Shi didn't know, and he was too lazy to think about it. Because at this moment, there was only one thought left in his mind, and that was, completely block the divine gate. For Ying, for Nyenyen, for their family of 3 to live a happy and stable life. Since opening the divine gate required a huge amount of spirit energy, then he wanted the spirit energy tide to never appear. From now on, he would be the dragon-breaking stone that stood between the 2 worlds. Wherever the spirit energy tide appeared, he would definitely be there. He wanted to completely cut off any connection between the 2 worlds. Disperse! This rain was not accompanied by lightning or thunder, but after Qin Shi roared at the sky, a series of deafening rolling thunders suddenly sounded in the sky. Boom! In an instant, the sky was like an army of thousands of soldiers and horses facing the enemy. The sound of drums was endless and rumbling. With Qin Shi as the center, a cyclone began to expand rapidly at a speed visible to the naked eye. Because it was spinning too fast, there were even white stripes visible to the naked eye on the inner wall of the cyclone. These stripes were like sharp blades, forming a meat grinder, enough to tear anything caught in the cyclone into pieces. The sky wailed, and the dark clouds roared in anger. Accompanied by the incessant flashes of lightning and rumbles of thunder, Chen Shi was like a black hole, pulling in all the clouds and cyclones in the world and sucking them in bit by bit. This was the true power of the divine transformation stage. When Chen Shi went all out, he could affect every corner of this planet. At this moment, he was like a Tao Tai from ancient times. He opened his mouth and crazily devoured the spiritual energy of heaven and earth on earth. Because only in this way could he immediately calm down the raging tide of spiritual energy. Unfortunately, Chen Shi had overestimated himself. After all, Earth was no longer the dead planet of the last days that didn't even have a celestial being. After tens of thousands of years of silence, this decaying cultivation planet finally glowed with new vitality. The tide of spiritual energy was the beginning of everything. This was not something that Chen Shi could stop by himself. Under the wheels of the Great Era, he was like a mantis that stretched out its arms to stop the car from moving forward. Even if he had to die, he would not hesitate. Ah! After Chen Shi let out a long roar, a huge figure suddenly appeared behind him. It was the Dharma form. It looked just like him, but its body was more than 20 meters tall. It stood proudly in the sky like a god. Surging spiritual energy continued to surge into his body. Chen Shi was like a balloon that was constantly inflating. There would be a time when he could not bear it anymore. Therefore, he urgently needed a channel to vent. This world, unsurprisingly, it became the channel for him to vent. In the blink of an eye, countless sword lights shot out, targeting the center of the cyclones one after another. Boom! Boom! Wherever the sword auras went, there would be a thunderous explosion in the air. For a moment, more than half of Asia was filled with earth-shattering thunder. Boom! Boom! The sword auras covered 30,000 miles, and one sword aura chilled 19 continents. If the heavens were in my way, I would smash the heavens. If the earth was in my way, I would flatten the earth. Chen Shi crazily grasped the spiritual energy of heaven and earth while constantly detonating the center of the cyclones with the sword auras, trying to stop the tide from surging at the root. A big ship sank because of a small hole. 100 feet dike collapsed because of an ant's nest. The method Chen Shi used seemed violent, but in fact, it was simple and effective. After his desperate series of attacks, the surging tide of spiritual energy was forcibly contained by him. The tide gradually receded, and the clouds and cyclones dissipated one by one. The dark clouds in the sky also dispersed, and the warm sun shone on the earth again. At this time, Chen Shi's pale face showed a smile with difficulty. It was finally calm. However, just as Chen Shi dragged his tired body and was about to return to Shangjing, a voice full of anger suddenly rang in his ears. "It's you. How dare you destroy the sacred ancestors' foundation? You're blocking my way to Tiandu. Hateful, hateful, hateful." This person's tone was filled with incomparable resentment, as if he had a grudge against Chen Shi for killing his father and stealing his wife. In the 3 hateful words in a row, there was an undisguised killing intent. This enmity was absolutely irreconcilable. After hearing this voice, Chen Shi was a little confused for a moment. Because this voice came out of nowhere, intermittent, and sounded a little strange, as if a voice changer was turned on, causing the voice to be distorted. However, Chen Shi still understood this person's words. In this regard, Chen Shi was unexpectedly mischievous. He imitated Fang Tangjing in the 9th grade Sesame official and shouted towards the sky with a cheeky face. Not satisfied? "Come and hit me, come and hit me." As he spoke, he twisted and turned in the air proudly. In fact, Chen Shi wasn't sure if the other party could hear his ridicule. Since the other party couldn't pass through the void and directly pressed him to the ground and beat him up, then this person definitely couldn't be the Taiching sacred ancestor. This person's cultivation was probably about the same as his, but the other party had touched the threshold of the word void, so he could directly talk to him from the great world. "You little thief! I'm so angry! Today, I swear that when the generals of Tiandu return, it will be the time to tear you into pieces. Remember this." Hearing this, Chen Shi laughed disdainfully. Immediately after, he acted out of character and directly raised his middle finger towards the sky. At the same time, he didn't forget to ridicule. Remember this, Mies. Obviously, that person was so angry that he couldn't speak, so he could only let out a roar of anger and helplessness. However, at this moment, the last cloud cyclone completely dissipated. The tide of spirit chi receded. That person's voice stopped abruptly, as if it had never appeared. Everything returned to silence. Chen Shi immediately withdrew the smile on his face. Chapter 366. This sudden thunderstorm also cooled down the excitement of the National Day celebration. As soon as Chen Shi stepped through the Chuehua gate, the little fellow, who was playing hide-and-seek with the two brothers in the yard, focused on him. Then, the little thing's eyes immediately lit up. "Papa, where did you go?" As she spoke, she ran excitedly to Chen Shi. The cute way she ran looked like a puppy at home. When she saw her owner come back, she would enthusiastically rush up and wag her tail. Of course, Nian was not a puppy. She was the most precious treasure in the world. Papa just went out because he had something to do. How was it? Did you have fun? I like the rain. It's fun. What's fun? Look at your clothes. They're soaking wet. Don't you feel cold? Hearing this, the little thing immediately shook her head like a rattledrum, and then said with certainty, "Not cold." "You're really not cold?" "Not cold." Looking at the little fellow's resolute look, it seemed that she really did not feel cold. However, as soon as the little fellow's voice fell, a cold wind suddenly blew over from nowhere. Her clothes were already a little wet, and after being blown by the cold wind, she could not help but shiver. Well, now she knew it was cold. The little fellow subconsciously pressed her body close to Chen Shi's chest, and then could not help but whisper, "It seems a little cold. It's good that you know it's cold. Don't play outside for too long when it rains, or the cold air will get into your body and make you sick. If you get sick, you have to take very bitter medicine. Do you understand?" Understood. The little fellow had not taken medicine for a long time. But when Chen Shi mentioned the word, medicine, she immediately recalled the bitter feeling, and her little nose wrinkled. "Let's go take a shower and change clothes." After the purpose of educating was achieved, Chen Shi held the little fellow and called the two brothers to follow him into the west wing. As soon as she entered the door, the little fellow saw Qin Ruoying and Qin Xueqing lying on the bed, so she immediately warned them in a low voice, "Shh, Mama is sleeping. Don't disturb her." "All right." The two brothers nodded in unison, then tiptoed into the bathroom. After all, Nian was a girl. Chen Shi naturally couldn't let her take a bath with the two brothers, so he had to wash the two brothers first before it was the little fellow's turn. Although Chen Shi's mood wasn't very good at the moment, but when facing the three children, he still showed enough patience. Even though the two brothers were very naughty when they were bathing, Chen Shi did not vent his anger on them. Children were always carefree. No matter what the situation was, happiness would always be the first thing in their hearts. Therefore, more than half an hour had passed by the time Chen Shi helped the three little fellows wash up, and their clothes were dried by Chen Shi with Jinchi. "Okay, go out and play. Wait, what do you want to eat tonight? Dad will make it for you later." "Braised pork ribs." After casually throwing out such a sentence, the little fellow hurriedly ran out of the west wing. "Okay, got it." After Chen Shi responded with a smile, he slowly walked to Qin Ruing's side. Looking at his lover lying quietly on the bed, Chen Shi couldn't help but gently leave a kiss on her forehead. After a kiss, the sister-in-law next to him suddenly made a soft moan, as if she had a nightmare. Chen Shi was about to reach out to check the situation, but Qin Xueqing jumped up from the bed like a frightened cheetah, and then kicked Chen Shi's head. "Stop, it's me." In front of Chen Shi, the sister-in-law would never have any possibility of resistance. He just casually glared at Qin Xueqing, and Qin Xueqing suddenly fell on the bed like a robot without power. "Let's talk. What did you see before you fainted?" The sister-in-law was a celestial being, and her foundation was much thicker than Qin Ruing's, so the information she provided was naturally more useful. After Qin Xueqing was pressed on the bed by Chen Shi, she was completely awake. The sister-in-law twisted her body and found that she couldn't move, so she couldn't help but blush and scold Chen Shi, "Hey, let go of me." But this don't. Why does it sound a little strange? Get up, do you want to drink water? No. Qin Xueqing seemed to dislike the feeling of being controlled by Qin Shi, so her attitude wasn't very good after she got up. But when she saw Qin Ring, the expression on her face slightly stiffened. Then Qin Xueqing quickly shifted her gaze to the window and then said, I saw a lot of people. Those people seemed to be walking on clouds and flying in the sky, and they were wearing very strange clothes, a bit like ancient people. Behind them was a very, very big palace, even bigger than the Forbidden City. They were all looking at me. Maybe they weren't looking at me. Anyway, from my point of view, they were looking at me. I saw the hostility in their eyes, and the murderous intent. I don't know how to describe that feeling to you. At that moment, I felt like Sun Wukong, who wreaked havoc in heaven, standing outside the southern heavenly gate, facing the gods and Buddhas in the sky alone. Qin Xueqing frowned, trying hard to recall the scene she saw at that time. When Chen Shi heard this last sentence, the corner of his mouth suddenly hooked up into a shallow arc. They weren't looking at you, they were looking at me. Looking at you? Why would they look at you? After hearing Qin Shi's words, Qin Xueqing shifted her gaze to him. She was really confused now, and really didn't understand the situation. Why did she suddenly faint? The people she saw in the dream, who exactly were they? His sister-in-law was confused, but Chen Shi had no intention of explaining. He leaned over and touched Qin Ruing's cheek, then immediately got up and walked straight out of the door. I'm going out first. If she wakes up early, remember to tell her I'll be back soon. Qin Xueqing felt that something was wrong with Chen Shi, and suddenly couldn't help but blurt out, Wait, where are you going? Chen Shi stopped in his tracks. Qin Xueqing looked at him, and then added in a slight panic, You didn't even tell me where you were going. How can I tell my sister where you're going? Seeing that his sister-in-law was so concerned, Chen Shi had to soften his tone, and smiled at her. Don't worry, I'm just going to Daiyu Island to get something. I'll be back soon. Chapter 367. Daiyu Island. Heron Island, the pavilion in the middle of the lake. As the saying goes, the cicada senses the golden wind before it moves, sending the impermanence of death without knowing it. Ever since Jiang Jingqing was injured by that outsider who came out of nowhere, the sky above Daiyu Island seemed to be shrouded in thick dark clouds. Everyone in the clan was anxious, and the atmosphere was gloomy. Everyone seemed to be more cautious than usual. As the clan leader, Jiang Yuankue did not step forward to appease everyone at such a critical time. Instead, he stayed on Heron Island all day, doing something unknown. Everyone thought that the clan leader was planning something big, but no one knew Jiang Yuankue himself was confused. Apart from preserving the most complete inheritance, the Jiang clan also had an immortal old monster who had lived for thousands of years. Based on this alone, Daiyu Island was destined to have too many secrets that no one knew. The great ancestor's seniority was there. Once the old man spoke, Jiang Yunkue naturally had to bow and listen. The great ancestor's words were simple. He wanted him to wait outside the pavilion in the middle of the lake and wait patiently for the fated person to appear. The fated person? Who was the fated person? Who was the fated person? The great ancestor's words must have a deeper meaning, so Jiang Yuankue had been thinking about this question for the past few days. However, no matter how hard he thought about it, he could not come up with a reliable answer. Until this day, a sudden tide of spiritual energy enveloped the entire world. As the place with the densest spiritual energy within 100 miles, a cloud vortex inevitably appeared in the sky above Daiyu Island. This scene was very similar to the scene described in Immortals at the Magpie Bridge. When the golden wind and the jade do meet, it surpasses countless things in the human world. It was only at this moment that Jiang Yuankue suddenly realized the sky had changed. Sure enough, when sword rays streaked across the sky and shot toward the vortex from afar, Jiang Yuankue finally understood who the fated person the great ancestor was talking about was. In this world, there was actually someone who was unwilling to ascend to the great world, and was instead trying his best to stop the divine gate from opening, going against the entire great world with his own strength. What kind of courage was this? Even Jiang Yuankue could not help but be fascinated. However, Jiang Yuankue was the clan leader after all. He had to think carefully about everything. Therefore, in the next moment, a thought suddenly popped up in his mind. If the divine gate could not be opened, who was the biggest beneficiary? Weren't they the 5 lands of legacy? Even though the old ancestor had never explicitly mentioned it, Jiang Yuankui was keenly aware of the problem at this moment. When the spirit qi on Earth began to recover, what was the difference between Earth and the Great World? The desert had already become an oasis, so why would the people need to migrate again? On Earth, they were the high and mighty Jiang clan. But in the Great World, they were sinners who were as lowly as ants. Since that was the case, why was the Jiang clan still anxiously waiting for the gate of heaven to open? Isn't it good to stay on Earth? Thinking of this, Jiang Yuankui couldn't help but look back at the pavilion in the middle of the lake. His face suddenly revealed a complicated expression of worry and joy. Could it be the elder ancestor really had such a plan? Jiang Yuankui stood at the bridgehead, letting his imagination run wild. At this moment, a figure suddenly appeared in the sky above Daiyu Island. Following that, he passed through the formation at an extremely fast speed and landed outside the pavilion in the middle of the lake. Only when that person opened the door curtain and made a slight movement did Jiang Yuankui's heart suddenly tremble. He quickly turned around and angrily shouted, "Who is it? How dare you trespass into the forbidden area of my clan?" However, before he could step forward to stop him, the elder ancestor's voice slowly came from the house. "Yuankui, you can leave first." Hearing this, Jiang Yuankui couldn't help but stop. He quickly bowed and replied, "Yes. Also, pass on my order. Ring the 9-dragon bell and summon all the elders in the clan. I have something important to announce to everyone." 9-dragon bell? Hearing this, Jiang Yuankui subconsciously opened his eyes wide. He even suspected that he had heard wrongly. The elder ancestor seemed to have noticed his abnormality, so he spoke again to confirm it. "Go, ring the 9-dragon bell." "Yes, elder ancestor." This time, he finally heard it clearly. Therefore, Jiang Yuankui immediately went to the bell tower by the lake. After taking a deep breath, he was full of excitement. He pushed the hammer hard and rang the ancient bronze bell in front of him that hadn't been rung for thousands of years. Dong, dong, dong. The heavy and distant sound of the bell suddenly rang out, startling tens of thousands of birds on the island. Before the bell rang for the 9th time, the bridge outside the pavilion in the middle of the lake was already densely packed with people. Among these people, the ones with the lowest cultivation were diviners. Among them were Jiang Yuankui's father, grandfather, great-grandfather, and the various Jiang clan ancestors. It was obvious that they were the core strength of the Jiang clan. These people used to represent the glory of the Jiang clan, but now they were representing the future of the Jiang clan. With the continuous recovery of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, the shackles of heaven and earth had been completely broken. In this short 1 year, many diviners had appeared in the Jiang clan. Among them, there were even those above diviners led by Jiang Jingqing. The future had come, and it had arrived. The Jiang clan was like a ferocious beast entrenched on Daiyu Island. At this moment, it finally revealed its ferocious and terrifying true face. Among the people by the lake, Jiang Yuankui's seniority was the lowest. However, due to his status as the current patriarch, Jiang Yuankui was fortunate enough to stand in the first row of the bridge. The entire place was silent. One could hear a pin drop. Everyone lowered their heads and ears, quietly waiting for the old ancestor to speak. No one knew who the old ancestor was talking to, nor did they know the content of their conversation. In short, after a long, long time, the old ancestor's voice suddenly rang out, instantly shaking everyone's hearts. "I am Jiang Yan, the 17th generation patriarch of the Jiang clan. Today, I declare, the Jiang clan will form an alliance with Mr. Chen and fight against Tiandu together." In ancient times, what crime did the Jiang clan commit? But the divine ancestor, for his own selfish reasons, listed our Jiang clan as sinners and suffered the pain of being trapped for 10,000 years. However, there is no need for such a crime. Today, We will follow Mr. Chen to expel the Heavenly Gate and break off Tiandu's path of retreat in order to protect our homeland. This is to inherit the legacy of our ancestors. Where righteousness lies, all the clansmen of the Jiang clan should take this as their responsibility. Everyone knows this. This sudden declaration of war instantly stupefied all of the Jiang clan clansmen present. The old ancestor wanted to crusade against Tiandu? Didn't the clan often offer sacrifices and pray for Tiandu to open a door so that the clansmen could ascend to the great world? Why did he suddenly want to rebel and go against Tiandu with the banner of Tiandu? Perhaps because the news came too suddenly, everyone was unable to accept it for a while. Many hot-tempered clansmen risked disobeying the old ancestor and kept asking why in a loud voice. One had to know that the great world was the immortal world that everyone dreamed of. What was the purpose of a person's life? If it weren't for the limited conditions on Earth, how could they be trapped in the heavenly realm? Only by going to the great world would they have the possibility of continuing to break through. Only by going to the great world and improving their realm could they live for another 100, 200, or even 1,000 years. Everyone had long had enough of being unable to break through because of the shackles of heaven and earth. It wasn't that they couldn't do it, but that the conditions didn't allow it. And this was the fundamental reason why people felt sad. The crowd was restless. Everyone was questioning the old ancestors' decision. If it weren't for the fact that the direct descendants of Jiang Yuankue were still trying to appease everyone, many people would have already rushed into the pavilion in the middle of the lake and demanded an explanation from the old ancestor. Just when the situation was out of control, a figure suddenly lifted the curtain and slowly walked out of the pavilion in the middle of the lake. So annoying. A bunch of short-sighted people. Sorry, my friend got married the day before yesterday. His hometown is really too far away. It takes 5 hours by car. When he gets there, he has to help out in all kinds of ways. He's really exhausted. I started to sleep when I got home last night. I'm finally full of energy today. I hope everyone can forgive me. Chapter 368. A hint of surprise flashed across everyone's faces when they saw the young man who suddenly walked out of the pavilion in the middle of the lake. It was true that cultivators could retain their youth forever and even regain their youthful vigor, but this was based on a strong foundation of cultivation. The person in front of them looked so young, which meant he was either a young man who was still wet behind the ears or an old man who had been through a lot. The former was almost impossible, so only the latter was left. Is this the Mr. Qin who injured Jingqing? I think so. I was a little late that day. When I got there, the elder ancestor had already asked him to move to Heron Island, so I only saw his back. But looking at this figure, this should be Mr. Chen without a doubt. I heard that Jingqing couldn't even take one hit from this person. Is this true? Yes, Jingqing probably underestimated his opponent. After all, he just broke through to the above divinity stage, so it's inevitable that he's a little impetuous. Based on Mr. Chen's previous battle record, this person should have already stepped into the above divinity stage. It makes sense that he could easily defeat Jingqing. I see. Everyone whispered to each other. At the same time, they had their own thoughts, but no one expressed them. Everyone heard the elder ancestor's words, but whether they agreed or not was another matter. Forming an alliance with Mr. Qin to fight against Heaven Capital? Putting aside the fact that Mr. Qin dared to make an enemy out of Heaven Capital, just the Jiang clan alone, could it really be that they could wrestle with the ancient cultivators in the Great World? Any random divine general who came out of the Divine Gate could probably clean up Daiyu Island from top to bottom. In fact, even Qin Shi felt that this was a little unbelievable. He had only come to ask the elder ancestor for the 500-year-old ginseng flower, hoping to use it to heal the internal injuries on his body. But he did not expect. When the elder ancestor confirmed that he was the one who defeated this rare spirit tide, he immediately expressed that he wanted to form an alliance with him to stop the Divine Gate from opening. What was going on? After thinking about it seriously, Qin Shi finally understood the elder ancestor's intentions. On Earth, the Jiang clan was one of the 5 great lands of heritage respected by everyone. But in the Great World, the Jiang clan was the descendant of a sinner who didn't even have the qualifications to enter the sect. It was a very simple multiple-choice question, wasn't it? However, due to the slave nature of his subconscious mind, even she felt that going against the Great World was simply courting death. Instead, it was this old man who had lived for over 1,000 years who saw through the essence of it at a glance and made the most correct choice, blocking the heavenly gate and separating the two realms. Only in this way would the Jiang clan truly welcome its own glory. But unfortunately, the truth is always in the hands of the minority. She stood at the head of the bridge and silently sized up the people in front of him. However, these people were looking at him with hostile gazes. She didn't have any reaction to this, because he knew someone would stand up for him. As expected, just as the crowd was discussing animatedly, a stern shout exploded in everyone's ears like a sudden clap of thunder. Lonesome, a bunch of short-sighted people. If it weren't for the fact that I already have half a foot in the Yellow Spring, why would I place such high hopes on you people? This old man has lived for over 1,000 years and has long seen the change of dynasties and the change of masters of mountains and rivers. You people count on the heavenly gate to ascend, but the heavenly gate hasn't opened for a long time. Now that it opens again and again, you people don't reflect on the deeper meaning behind it. Instead, you are like hungry dogs begging for food, wishing that you could ascend immediately. Those who have such thoughts are truly ignorant, short-sighted, unable to distinguish right from wrong, and causing harm in the evening. This old man stands here today to tell you all, misfortune is a blessing in disguise, and a blessing in disguise. Thousands of years have passed, and circumstances have changed with the passage of time. China has been restored, and the spiritual energy is torrential. You people count on ascending to the upper realm, but you don't know that the people of the upper realm. I also want to return to the divine great land and fight against you all. As soon as these words came out, everyone was shocked. The ancient cultivators were coming back? But wasn't it because the great world was just a crack in the depths of the universe? Therefore, there was actually a fundamental difference between it and Earth. Earth was a planet with life, a holy land for cultivation. Even if there was a period of time when the spirit chi was weak, this situation was only temporary. However, this short period of time might be very long for humans. It could be thousands of years, or tens of thousands of years, or even hundreds of thousands of years, or even millions of years. But for a planet with a lifespan of 10 billion years, 1 million years was too short, and 10 million years was too short. Even 100 million years only occupied 1% of its lifespan. And the great world? It was just a crack in the void, and it might suddenly close one day. Without the constant support of a planet with life, no matter how rich the spiritual energy in the great world was, there would be a day when it would be exhausted. They were both spiritual energy, but one was a renewable resource, and the other was a non-renewable resource. The difference between the two was like heaven and earth. Humans had to learn to be vigilant in times of peace. Therefore, the main point was not whether the spiritual energy in the great world was exhausted, but the spiritual energy on Earth had begun to recover. Since that was the case, why not return to Earth in advance to preserve the resources of the great world and deal with the next age of chaos? Therefore, just as the person behind the heavenly gate said, the return of Tiandu, it had to be done. The reason why the old man was able to see through this before she was because his thoughts were different from hers. She only wanted a family of 3 to live a peaceful life, while the old man wanted to take advantage of the situation and rise up in response to the heavens, thereby changing the fate of the Jiang family in one fell swoop. If they could really cut off the connection between the two worlds, then from now on, the Jiang family would be the most powerful legacy force in the world. Tens of thousands of years of accumulation, it was time to welcome the day when it would explode. Perhaps because there was an outsider like Shi present, the old man's lecture did not last for too long, and many of his words were not that straightforward. However, since he had already flipped out, naturally, no one dared to jump out and question him. The scene quickly quieted down, and everyone lowered their heads, pretending to be docile. A gentle breeze blew, ruffling the calm surface of the lake. After a long while, the old man's voice sounded again. Yuan Kuei, pass on my command. Open the seal, pluck the adumbra flower, and give it to Mr. Chen. Ah! Jiang Yunhui was stunned for a moment, somewhat doubting whether he had heard wrongly. The adumbra flower? As long as one was a member of the Jiang family, there was not a single person who had not imagined that they would be the fated person for this flower. Jiang Jingqing had dared to force Jiang Yunkuei to hand over the adumbra flower during the clan sacrifice ceremony because he had relied on his cultivation above the heavenly man level and was certain that the elder ancestor would not do anything to him. After all, one should not let one's own fertile water flow into one's own fields. But now, the elder ancestor wanted to give this rare flower to an outsider. Could it be that he had heard wrongly? Jiang Yunkuei was completely dumbfounded, so after hearing the old man's words, he still stood in the same spot, unmoving. However, before the Jiang family members present could voice their doubts, the old man's voice rang out again. Ancestor Yushan left behind this adumbra flower before he ascended, and left a prophecy. This flower belongs to the fated person. Since the fated person has already been found, then it's time to pluck this flower. Go, pass on my command, give the adumbra flower to Mr. Chen. Chapter 369. The Adumbra Flower. Upon hearing these words, even Qin Shi couldn't help but reveal an astonished expression. He really didn't expect that the adumbra flower would exist on Earth. The words of the adumbra flower were auspicious. It only appeared once every 3,000 years and was a heavenly flower that didn't exist in this world. But in reality, the adumbra flower's seedlings weren't very rare. What was truly rare was its 3,000-year flowering period. A whole 3,000 years. One had to know that with Qin Shi's current cultivation, he could barely live for 2,000 years. But this adumbra flower needed 3,000 years of cultivation before it could fully mature and bloom. Just based on this growth period alone, it was destined that this strange flower would have extraordinary effects. According to the rumors in the pugilistic world, even if an ordinary person consumed this flower, he or she would be able to become an immortal and ascend to the heavens. He or she would immediately live as long as the heavens and the earth and be as old as the sun and moon. Of course, this was just an unreliable rumor. When Qin Shi was in the heavenly spiral continent, he had heard that a mature adumbra flower had appeared in the north. During that time, countless immortal cultivators rushed to the north almost every day in an attempt to obtain this flower. This flower was like a food shortage on an isolated island. Naturally, it would attract the attention of countless wild beasts. But there was only one adumbra flower, but tens of thousands of immortal cultivators had participated in the fight for it. Naturally, a bloodbath had begun because of this. Countless people had paid the price with their lives. More than half of the north had become a living hell, a furnace of flesh and blood. So much so that even after this incident had died down, the words adumbra flower could still cause people's expressions to change. With Qin Shi's personality, he naturally didn't want to participate in this kind of fight. But this didn't mean that he wasn't interested in the adumbra flower. If the ancient records were correct, this flower was a rare treasure. It had the miraculous effect of nourishing one's golden core and nourishing one's soul. If an ordinary person consumed it, they could even complete a transformation in an extremely short amount of time and condense a golden core. What kind of concept was this? A golden core. A lifespan of 500 years. If an ordinary person could directly advance to a golden core after consuming it, how powerful would its effects be if it was used as medicine, refined, and then given to immortal cultivators to consume? When he thought of this, Qin Shi suddenly felt a sense of excitement. However, this feeling was not for himself, but for Qin Ring, who was still lying in bed. After all, as a qualified husband, he could only use the iPhone 8 that his wife had exchanged for if she had switched to the iPhone 10. The logic was that simple. Qin Shi had even made up his mind. Even if he had to turn hostile and snatch the adumbra flower, he was going to snatch it back. Ginseng flowers nourish the body, blood thorns nourish the mind, and the adumbra flower, although Qin Shi's alchemy skills could not be considered top-notch, he should be able to use these 3 precious herbs to concoct a cauldron of 10 complete tonics. Ying would eat the meat and he would drink the soup. Wouldn't that be perfect? Perhaps he could even use this opportunity to heal the internal injuries in his body and rule over this world in his peak state. By then, he only needed to stand in front of the heavenly gate and see if anyone could come out of the great world. Chen Shi pondered silently. Although he really wanted to obtain this Adumbra flower, he did not let his guard down because of this. As the saying went, one who was unaccountably solicitous was hiding evil intentions. The old man's motives were indeed very suspicious. Why did he have to give this Adumbra flower to him for no reason? Chen Shi could not figure it out. The Jiang clan members probably could not figure it out either. But now was not the time to delve into this question, so Chen Shi could only put this question aside for the time being and wait for the Jiang clan's final statement. Although the old man had already formed Ying, after losing his physical body, he was more like a mascot and did not have any substantial deterrence. So Chen Shi did not have much hope. Didn't he see that the group of people opposite him looked like they wanted to eat him alive? The watermelon that they had raised for a year had been stolen just like that. No one would be able to accept that, right? If a fight had to break out, for the sake of the old man, Chen Shi could be merciful and guarantee that he would not harm anyone's life. Chen Shi was prepared to fight, but the development of the situation was somewhat beyond his expectations. After hearing the old man's order to deal with them according to the clan rules, the originally restless crowd instantly quieted down. Everyone glared angrily at Chen Shi, but no one dared to stand out and question the old man's decision. From this, it could be seen how high the old man's position in the Jiang clan was. Yuan Kuei go. After the old man spoke for the 3rd time, no matter how unwilling Jiang Yuan Kuei was, he could only sigh helplessly in the end. Then he bowed and replied, Yuan Kuei accepts the order. Old ancestor, please wait for a moment. After he finished speaking, Jiang Yuan Kuei flicked his sleeves and left with an indignant expression. He was the current clan leader of the Jiang clan and was the old ancestor's direct descendant. So, Jiang Yuan Kuei had always thought that the old ancestor was biased towards him. It was laughable that he had been constantly fighting with Jiang Jingqing in the open and in the shadows all these years. Who would have thought that in the end he had made a wedding dress for someone else? How could Jiang Yuan Kuei not be angry? But although he was angry, he still had to listen to the old ancestor's orders. The seal was on the stone platform on the other side of the lake. Through the clan leader's imprint, Jiang Yuan Kuei quickly opened the seal and saw the full appearance of the Adumbra flower with his own eyes. This was a plant that had never appeared on Earth before. If he really had to describe it, its appearance was somewhat like a Inga pineapple. Its leaves were like fans and its entire body was sparkling and translucent. It was as if it was made of crystal and its fine hair could be seen. As soon as the seal was opened, a refreshing fragrance wafted out with the breeze. Jiang Yuan Kuei only took a breath and felt his entire body relax, as if he had an inexhaustible energy. The flower was a strange flower, but it was as weak as a roadside rose. Jiang Yuan Kuei only used a little force and plucked this strange flower that people yearned for day and night. It was unknown if it was because the desire in his heart was too strong, but after Jiang Yuan Kuei plucked the Adumbra flower, he forgot himself and put it on the tip of his nose to sniff it. As the eldest son of the direct descendant, Jiang Fengyan naturally had to stay by Jiang Yuan Kuei's side. At this moment, he saw that Jiang Yuan Kuei was in a daze after receiving the flower, so he could not help but remind him, "Father, the seal is not closed yet. Why don't I take it?" Hearing this, Jiang Yuan Kuei seemed to wake up from a dream. He looked at the pavilion in the middle of the lake with a flustered expression, then said in a slightly embarrassed manner, "Ahem. Go, I'll close the seal. You go and present this flower to Mr. Chen." After he finished speaking, Jiang Yuan Kuei carefully handed the Adumbra flower to Jiang Fengyan. At this moment, the father and son's expressions were like torchbearers passing the Olympic flame. They looked exceptionally serious. However, the next moment, something unexpected happened. After Jiang Fengyan received the Adumbra flower, he seemed to have gone crazy. He took off running in the opposite direction. This unexpected change stunned Jiang Yuan Kuei for a moment. By the time he came back to his senses, Jiang Fengyan had already run nearly 100 meters away. He must have used all his strength. Fengyan, what are you doing? Hurry up and get back here. Jiang Fengyan was only one step away from becoming a diviner. Running at full speed, his speed was naturally extremely fast. Seeing this, Jiang Yuankue could not help but feel anxious. Just as he was about to chase after him, he heard Jiang Fengyan roar without turning his head, "Father, why should you give this flower to an outsider? The elder ancestor is unjust. I don't accept this." At this moment, Jiang Fengyan was like a child who had been wronged. After being scolded by an adult, he wanted to escape from this place as far as possible. However, among the people present, the person with the lowest cultivation was a diviner. How could he tolerate such nonsense? Jiang Fengyan had probably thought of this as well. Therefore, while he was running, he grabbed the adumbra flower and stuffed it into his mouth. Since his father could not have it, then no one else could. He would die today. Chapter 370. People were always greedy. The so-called 5 poisonous hearts of Buddhism: greed, anger, stupidity, hesitation, and doubt. In ancient books, it was often mentioned that lust was the leader of all evils, but this lust did not refer to sex, but to indulge and indulge without restraint, which was also greed. That is, the source of all evils. Greed was the leader of all evils. Greed, in fact, was the root of all troubles. Could it be that Jiang Fengyan really took the adumbra flower because he refused to accept the decision of the ancestor? People often said, even if you have money, you need to be alive to spend it. But this adumbra flower was a rare treasure that could not be bought with money. And the most important point was, this flower was easy to take, and one only needed to open their mouth and swallow the flower, and it would immediately take effect. In the face of such a strong temptation, even someone with a firm heart like Jiang Yuankue could not help but feel greedy, let alone Jiang Fengyan, a young man who was still wet behind the ears. Therefore, Jiang Fengyan decided to gamble with his little life. As long as he cooked the rice, the ancestor should not do anything to him because he was the eldest son of the direct line of descent. No matter what, Jiang Fengyan was still a pure-blooded Jiang clansman. Even if he took the adumbra flower, it would just flow to his family's field. It had to be said that Jiang Fengyan was indeed very bold. But he neglected the most important question, and that was, how far could he run? When he was caught, would he be able to successfully swallow this adumbra flower? Jiang Fengyan overestimated his speed and greatly underestimated the pursuit he would face. In fact, the moment Jiang Fengyan ran away, Qin Shi had already noticed something was wrong. The reason why he did not immediately take action was actually because he wanted to see if they could solve this problem on their own for the sake of the old man. After all, he was just a guest who came to visit. How could a guest go to the kitchen to serve dishes by himself? Based on this consideration, Qin Shi did not stop Jiang Fengyan. However, the Jiang clan members present seemed to have been struck dumb by this sudden turn of events. After a long while, a few people came back to their senses first, and then directly set off to chase. The speed of running was naturally not as fast as the speed of flying. But Jiang Fengyan never thought of running away. He only wanted to use this opportunity to stall for time so that he could successfully swallow the entire adumbra flower. Therefore, as soon as those people rose into the air, Jiang Fengyan had already stuffed the adumbra flower into his mouth. Sigh. Seeing that it was too late to stop him, Qin Shi could only sigh silently and prepare to do it himself. However, just as Qin Shi was about to attack, the old man's voice suddenly exploded from the clouds, causing the entire Heron Island to tremble. Evil creature! How dare you! That voice was so loud that it sounded like the furious roar of a deity. Immediately afterward, a huge amount of true essence gushed out from the pavilion in the middle of the lake. The ferocity of its momentum was as if the heavens and earth were collapsing, and the mountains were collapsing and the earth was cracking. An incomparably surging Zhenyuan poured out from the pavilion in the middle of the lake. The lake water that was affected by the Zhenyuan suddenly sprayed up into the sky like a fountain. In that instant, raging waves filled the sky, and the mountains and rivers trembled. The entire Heron Island was trembling in the old man's anger. Seeing this, Jiang Yuankui was so scared that his liver and gallbladder were almost torn apart. He could only look up to the sky and shout in panic, "This child is not sensible. Ancestor, please show mercy and spare his life." Unfortunately, Jiang Yuankui's words were still too late. A water column suddenly rose from the lake and then shot toward Jiang Fengyan at an unimaginable speed. At that moment, time seemed to have stopped. Jiang Fengyan even maintained the posture of wanting to swallow the adumbra flower as he ran. Boom! However, the huge wave arrived first. Like a flash flood, it instantly swallowed Jiang Fengyan whole. When the huge wave dissipated, the rocks, weeds, trees, and slopes where Jiang Fengyan was standing were all buried by the huge wave. As a result, the area within a few hundred meters had become a ruined scene after the flash flood. There was nothing left. Only broken trees, broken branches, and yellow soil were left on the ground. After seeing such a scene, Jiang Yuankui couldn't help but feel sad. After rushing to the place where Jiang Fengyan was before, he completely disregarded his image and used his hands to search the soil. "Fengyan! Fengyan! Where are you? Father is here to save you. Where are you? Answer me!" The so-called father and son were connected by heart. At this moment, it was deeply reflected. Even if Jiang Fengyan had committed a heinous crime, Jiang Yuankui couldn't bear to see him suffer any harm. But how powerful was the ancestor's power? With just one move, everything in front of him was wiped out, including Jiang Fengyan. When he thought that his son might have been killed by the ancestor himself and died without a complete corpse, Jiang Yuankui couldn't help but lie in the soil and cry bitterly. But at this moment, the old man's voice sounded again. "Pass my order. Jiang Fengyan has committed a crime of disobedience. He is punished to meditate in the dry pool for 60 years. During this period, without my permission, he is not allowed to take a step out of the dry pool." The dry pool was the place where the Jiang clan punished sinners. There were all kinds of torturing formations set up in it. But the ancestor asked Jiang Fengyan to stay in there for 60 years, which was 60 years. This could already be considered the harshest punishment. But when Jiang Yuankui heard this sentence, it was as if he had heard great news. He quickly knelt on the ground and kowtowed while shouting, "Thank you, ancestor, for not killing me. Thank you, ancestor, for not killing me. Thank you, ancestor, for not killing me." After the old man made his move, this farce finally came to an end. As for the adumbra flower that countless people yearned for day and night, under the old man's protection, it flew into Qin Shi's hands, unharmed. The flower finally fell into the hands of the fated person. "Thank you." After reaching out to take the adumbra flower, Chen Shi turned around and looked at the pavilion in the middle of the lake with interest. The old man really hid it well. Just from this, Chen Shi was enough to judge that the old man's strength at his peak was definitely not inferior to Bai Hong's, as expected of an old man who had lived for more than 1,000 years. He really did not make a move, but when he did, it was indeed shocking. Chen Shi had always thought that after the old man lost his physical body, he had completely become the Jiang clan's mascot. Now it seemed that he had underestimated the heroes of the world. The old man must have mastered some secret technique that even he did not know about. That was why he could continue to cast spells without a physical body. To be honest, Chen Shi was now more and more interested in this old man. He hid too many secrets, and Chen Shi could not understand his motives at all. There was no such thing as a free lunch in this world. So here came the question. From the beginning, the old man had been especially attentive to him. Now, he did not hesitate to seriously injure his descendants to give him the adumbra flower. Chapter 371. 1,000-year-old Go, the reincarnation of the Chicken King. If life was a survival competition, the old man's chances of winning the chicken dinner would be far greater than anyone else's. He wasn't afraid of his opponent being tough or reckless, he was only afraid of his opponent being cunning. If he really met such a wretched opponent, no matter how strong he was, he couldn't help but mutter in his heart. After all, who knew when this old fellow would pop out and stab him in the back? Chen Shi was indeed very interested in the old man's secrets. Thus, after obtaining the Adumbra flower, he was prepared to return to the pavilion in the middle of the lake to have a good chat with the old man. However, he had just taken a step when the old man's voice suddenly rang out again. Since Sir has already obtained the Adumbra flower, you should be returning from a rewarding journey today. There are many matters to attend to in the clan. You've also seen the farce just now. Please don't take it to heart. I'll teach them a good lesson right now. I'll definitely make sure they remember what rules are. That's all for today. It's inconvenient for me to move around. Please forgive me. Help me send the guests off. After hearing the elder master's words, Jiang Yuankue immediately stood up from the soil and wiped the mud off his face. At the same time, he replied rather excitedly, "Yue obeys." After he finished speaking, Jiang Yuankue shook violently and used his inner yuan to shake off all the mud and dust on his body. His entire person looked like a brand new person, as if he had just taken a bath. If the elder master had asked him to send the guests off, that meant, in the elder master's heart, he, Jiang Yuankue, was still the current clan leader of the Jiang clan. The elder master didn't hold a grudge against him because of what had just happened. How could Jiang Yuankue not be excited? Thus, he immediately ran over to Chen Shi eagerly. There's no need to send the guests off. Seeing that the old man was closing the door to his guests, Chen Shi could only smile and shake his head. No matter what, they were still considered allies now. Furthermore, he had received a greeting gift from the old man. Naturally, he couldn't cause any unhappiness with the old man over such a small matter. After all, they had just formed an alliance and were still in their honeymoon period. I came in a hurry today, so I didn't bring any gifts. Instead, I received a big gift from you for no reason. I'll remember this favor for now. Once I've refined this Adumbra flower into a pill, I'll bring a portion back for you. That way, your grandchildren won't blame me for stealing their good stuff. Having said that, Chen Shi shifted his gaze to the direction where Jiang Fengyan was just now. That location was originally a small forest. The forest was full of fragrant grass and flowers. It was indeed a place with excellent scenery. But unfortunately, after being struck by the old man in anger, all that was left of this place was a puddle of yellow soil and mud. It looked like an abandoned construction site on a rainy day. It was a messy scene. The scenery on Heron Island was picturesque. However, this scene was like a drop of ink accidentally spilled on a painting, completely destroying the beauty of the entire painting. This happened because of me. It's a pity for this forest. I don't want to ruin the beautiful scenery of the island because of this. Fine, then let it return to its original form. As he spoke, Chen Shi raised his hands and made a gesture. Immediately after, a flower formed by the condensation of vital qi slowly bloomed in his palm. After Chen Shi gently waved his hand, the glowing green flower flew straight to the ruins. The Jiang clan members present were somewhat confused. They had no idea what Chen Shi was doing. The only thing they could confirm was everyone was quite dissatisfied with Chen Shi's words and deeds. They only felt that he was taking advantage of the situation and saying useless words. To be honest, instead of wasting time here, he might as well get out of Daiyu Island as soon as possible. Out of sight, out of mind. Who didn't know how to say beautiful words? It was just a small forest. If it was destroyed, so be it. Did they need him to repair it? How was he going to repair it? He was just spouting nonsense. Because the elder ancestor had just flipped out, no one dared to directly express their dissatisfaction. They could only look at Chen Shi with a rather strange expression. However, the next moment, something that caused everyone to be dumbstruck suddenly happened just like that. It was clearly early autumn, but Heron Island seemed to have ushered in the return of spring and the revival of all things. Green sprouts rapidly grew at a speed visible to the naked eye on the yellow soil and mud within a radius of a few hundred meters. Then, in the short span of a few breaths, these green sprouts grew into countless plants and flowers. Large trees were uprooted from the ground, and fresh flowers bloomed brilliantly. In an instant, fragrant grass covered the ground, and mountain flowers bloomed brilliantly. Although it was still a far cry from the lush greenery from before, it was no less than a miracle in everyone's eyes. Who present did not have the ability to destroy mountains and break rocks. However, It was undoubtedly a fantasy to ask them to revive all things and rejuvenate them. It was just like how humans had invented an unparalleled nuclear bomb but still had not found an effective way to cure cancer. Destruction was always easier than construction. As for them, clearly they were still far from it. After Qin Shi showed off his skills, the Jiang clan members present finally understood why the elder ancestor was so friendly to this outsider. As the saying went, knowing someone by their reputation was not as good as meeting them in person. The Jiang clan members present finally had a deep understanding of the 3 words, Mr. Qin. Sir, you have great skills. This old man has learned something today. The old man praised from the bottom of his heart. After Qin Shi heard that, he smiled and waved his hand. He replied nonchalantly, "All right, I won't say any more pleasantries. I'll visit you another day. Goodbye." As soon as she finished speaking, Qin Shi suddenly disappeared under the watchful eyes of the crowd. After he left, many Jiang clan members seemed to have come back to their senses. They hurriedly looked around, trying to find his departing figure. Qin Shi was also very satisfied with his performance just now. Therefore, on the way back to Shangjing, he was still recalling that feeling in his mind. Compared to when he made Qing Shan wear the red makeup, his current methods could be considered to be more skillful. In fact, it could be counted as a spell, but it could also be counted as not. Because it included the use of vital essence and Qin Shi's comprehension of the laws of heaven and earth. It was definitely not as simple as casting a spell. The laws of heaven and earth were a very mysterious thing. From the reincarnation of life and death, to the rotation of the sun and moon, to the rise of clouds and rosy clouds, to the blowing of the wind on the hills. Even if it was as small as gravel or dust, it contained a certain amount of the laws of heaven and earth. Just as the eminent monks often said, every sip and every bite was predetermined. There must be a reason for the Lanyin silk fruit. This made Qin Shi feel a little strange. After all, he usually did not cultivate at all. When he had time, he would accompany his wife and play with his children. Why did his comprehension of the laws of heaven and earth become deeper? Could it be this was the so-called cultivation in the secular world? Only by experiencing the secular world could one taste the various forms of life and enjoy the 7 emotions and 6 desires. Since Tianxian already had the 3 paths of heartless, unruffled, and heartless, then why couldn't he create a brand new emotional path based on his own experience? Benevolence, righteousness, propriety, wisdom and trust, gentleness, respect, frugality, and tolerance. With the traditional virtues of Hua Xia as the outline, he created his own path. Chapter 372. For ordinary people, National Day was still National Day, except that there was a rainstorm that didn't last long. It was sunny after the rain, and the autumn air was refreshing. It was a good time for sightseeing. With the rise of short videos, many cities in the southwest began to gradually become popular on the internet, which also diverted a lot of tourists from the old tourist cities. As the capital of a country, Shangjing had its own unique cultural heritage, so during the National Day holiday, the capital was still the first choice for people to travel in the country. The Great Wall, the Forbidden City, Tiananmen Square, Prince Gong's Mansion, Summer Palace, Hohai, almost all the famous scenic spots were crowded with tourists. As far as the eye could see, there was a dense mass of people at the back of their heads. It was truly crowded and bustling with noise and excitement. As for the annoying rain just now, obviously, it was completely forgotten by everyone. However, it was because of the heavy rain just now that Shangjing finally ushered in a good day with clear skies and clear winds. The sky was blue and the clouds were white. There was no trace of fog, and the sky was blue like the satin produced by the Jiangning weaving department. It looked particularly smooth and soft, and people couldn't help but want to reach out and touch it. If you add in the fresh and pleasant air, even the tourists who were complaining about the rain just now couldn't wait for another heavy rain like this tomorrow, so that they could enjoy the most complete classical beauty of Shangjing. All the scenic spots were lively, but the most unique old alley of Shangjing was still so quiet. Tourists in 2s and 3s stood in the alley taking photos. When they saw Qin Shi directly open the door of the courtyard, they couldn't help but show a trace of envy in their eyes. The courtyard of Shangjing. It was very valuable. When Qin Shi crossed the Chuihua gate with big and small bags, Qin Ruing had already woken up. Qin Xueqing accompanied her in the room and talked. Because Gu Lao hadn't seen Qin Shi for a long time, he called Xiao Yuan to the kitchen to prepare dinner. The three little guys' activity level was seriously over the limit, so when Qin Shi entered the door, he saw the three of them lying on the sofa watching cartoons attentively. This was their family's national day. It was an ordinary national day. The sister-in-law seemed to want to know what Qin Shi was doing just now, so she couldn't help but ask a few times. However, she was fooled by Qin Shi. Going to Diyu Island was an official matter, but going home was a private matter. Public affairs and private affairs should not be mixed together. Qin Shi had always been very clear about this. After the backbone returned, the Sihiyuan quickly became lively again, as if nothing had happened. Gu Lao was in charge of cooking, and Qin Shi and Xiao Yuan were his assistants. Soon, a large table of delicacies was served. At this time, the shortcomings of the north had to be mentioned, and that was, the temperature difference between day and night was huge, and the sun set quickly. Just after 6 o'clock, the sky gradually darkened. When it was time to light the lanterns, the heavy rain had just stopped. Raindrops that had not yet dried up slowly rolled down from the leaves. Birds were looking out from under the eaves. The wind was cool, bringing with it the fragrance of the earth that came from nowhere. The little fellow looked up and saw a few stars blinking in the sky. This song is so nice. Papa taught me. I learned it right away. It's very easy. Come, I'll teach you. Sing with me. The dark sky hangs low, and the bright stars follow. Insects fly, insects fly. Who are you thinking of? In the brightly lit central room, the little fellow did not have stage fright in front of the big family. Instead, she clapped her hands and sang "Insects Fly" with her sweet voice. Although the brothers were a little embarrassed, they still plucked up the courage to sing with the little fellow under everyone's constant encouragement. The beautiful child's voice kept ringing in the room. For a moment, the big courtyard was a little more warm because of this. The 7-day holiday passed quickly. Qin Shi also did as the little girl wished. In these few days, she took the two brothers to accompany her in Shangjing City to play to their heart's content. However, playing was one thing. When the holiday was over, she had to go to school. For this reason, the father and daughter held pinky hooks. Probably because she was in a good mood at that time, Nian also patted her chest and promised that she would go to kindergarten when school started. But, when it was the day of school, the little fellow stayed in bed and did not want to get up. Qin Shi had no choice but to carry her to kindergarten. For this reason, Nian lost her temper. If she had not heard that the brothers had already gone to kindergarten, she would have been rolling on the ground. Then again, even adults had holiday syndrome, let alone a child who was only the size of a bean. Therefore, Qin Shi could understand Nian's feelings. However, considering that the child was growing up day by day, preschool education was really important. Therefore, Qin Shi could only bear the pain and play the role of a strict father for once. After all, this time, he could not give up halfway like before, right? When the father and daughter arrived at the school, there were already many parents sitting in the classroom with their children. In fact, compared with other children, Nian's performance was already very good. At least she did not cry, right? When she found the two brothers in the classroom, the performance of the three little fellows was even more outstanding. Other children were crying, but the three of them were happily playing with the small toys prepared by the teacher. The teacher used the performance of the three of them to encourage other children. After the little fellow heard this, her little face was so happy that flowers were about to bloom. Therefore, before Qin Shi spoke, the little fellow took the initiative to say to Qin Shi, "It's time for class. Papa, go back? I'm not afraid." Looking at her proud little face, it seemed that she had completely forgotten how she was lying in bed in the morning. "Okay, you three be good and listen to the teacher. Papa will pick you up later. Goodbye, Papa." Looking at Nian's cute little face, Qin Shi's heart melted. Therefore, like many other parents, he stood in the corridor and secretly watched for a long time before he reluctantly left. Nian Nian started school, and Qin Shi finally had some free time. In fact, during this period of time, he had been thinking about how to combine the prescription in order to maximize the medicinal effects of the Adumbra flower. After all, he had too few resources at his disposal and could only supplement it with ordinary herbs. Qin Shi pondered over the prescription as he walked out of the school gate. However, at this moment, an A6 suddenly stopped in front of him. Then, a man rolled down the window and smiled at him. "Mr. Qin, can I give you a ride? Today is October 21st, it's my birthday. Birthday wish, finish the book properly, don't end it badly. This is also the first time I've written a book to 800,000 words. I've completely turned from a semi-newcomer to a veteran author. I've also experienced a lot of ups and downs. I'm only half a step away from becoming a god, so my mentality has changed a lot compared to a year ago. This book has already reached 50,000 high subscriptions when it was 700,000 words. It's really 50,000. There's absolutely no exaggeration. Unfortunately, I collapsed. I've indeed never written so many words before, so I'm getting weaker and weaker towards the end. Practicing with 10,000 subscriptions, thinking slowly, writing slowly, learning slowly. I don't think there are many people in Yuan who have tried this. Therefore, I definitely won't stop writing because I still need to improve. Well, I won't say any more nonsense. Actually, I just want to sincerely thank everyone for their continuous support on my birthday. Every comment, every recommendation ticket, every monthly ticket, every gift, I've seen it all and remembered it in my heart. Chapter 373. Mr. Qin, can I give you a ride? The man in front of him was Wang Junxing, who sat at the same table as Qin Shi on the day Nian Nian entered the school. Perhaps it was because of his age, but Wang Junxing always gave off a mature and steady vibe. It was what people often referred to as manliness. When this kind of man smiled, even as a man, he could not help but be captivated by his charm and seriously think about every word he said. This was the charm of a mature man and had nothing to do with gender. If an analogy was to be made, a mature man was like a bottle of aged wine. The moment the bottle was opened, the fragrance was enough to attract everyone's attention. Obviously, Wang Junxing wanted to use this opportunity to talk to Qin Shi. But unfortunately, after Qin Shi heard him, he waved his hand and smiled. "No need, my house is nearby. It's faster to take the small road back." After that, Qin Shi did not even give Wang Junxing a chance to speak again. He turned around and walked along the sidewalk. "Brother Wang, who is this guy? Since he's so shameless, why don't I just go and have a chat with him?" Zhao Ziyu was sitting in the driver's seat. After seeing Qin Shi leave, he suddenly felt like he was insulted. He almost got out of the car to teach Qin Shi a lesson. Kidnap him and talk? Wang Junxing coldly interrupted him. Hearing this, Zhao Ziyu suddenly became like a frosted eggplant and completely withered. It was not difficult to see that the two of them were not ordinary friends. Instead, it was more like a superior and subordinate relationship. Didn't you always say that you have eyes and ears in Beijing? It's been more than a month. How come there is no reliable news at all? Didn't we already investigate to Zhonghai? We even found the household register for you. If you ask me, this guy is just a bumpkin. Brother Wang, why do you care so much about him? How can a bumpkin get a kid into this school? Wang Junxing casually asked a rhetorical question and directly made Zhao Ziyu speechless. Actually, thinking about it, it made sense. Even though it was just a small kindergarten, the water inside was deep. From the first day the children stepped into this kindergarten, regardless of their future academic performance, they would definitely follow the pre-planned path all the way forward. They would go through childhood, primary, junior, high, and finally plunge into the top schools in the country, such as Qing, Bei, Rinla, and so on. The only possible fork in the road was the choice between politics and business. Those in business could choose to study abroad, while those in politics had to stay in the country to further their studies. This was indeed the case. While the bumpkins were still warming up at the starting line, others were already drinking champagne and celebrating at the finish line. However, this was not to say that society was unfair. After all, ever since the fall of the Qing dynasty, whose ancestors were not farmers, other people had to go through at least 3 generations of accumulation before their children and grandchildren could enjoy the wealth they had today. Alright, let's leave it at that. I just thought that this person wasn't simple, so I wanted to make friends with him. Since she's unwilling, let's put this matter aside for now. Anyway, the child is still young. Let's see how it goes in the future. The car with the Beijing A license plate slowly drove away. At this time, Qin Shi, who had already walked more than 100 meters away, suddenly turned her head to look at the car. Her face revealed a thoughtful expression. Time passed day by day. It was so peaceful that there was not a trace of ripple. In the blink of an eye, another month passed. Today was November 1st. It was Halloween abroad and Little Singles Day in China. The autumn air was refreshing, and the smell of osmanthus was wafting in the air. It was a good time to play. And from National Day until now, the only good news during this period was Gu Yao's soul had finally stabilized and could move freely without the soul crystal. Although the soul could not speak, it could convey the emotions in her heart through the soul. Therefore, the moment Qin Shi released her, he sensed the true feelings in Gu Yao's heart. She was very happy. Happy from the bottom of her heart. At this time, Gu Yao finally regained a little bit of her humanity. Although her IQ was still slightly lower than that of ordinary people, at least she was no longer a ferocious ghost who lacked brains. In addition to this matter, something else happened that made Qin Shi quite depressed. That was, Ninya no longer called him Papa in a coquettish voice. Thinking about this, Qin Shi's heart immediately gave birth to 10,000 depression. That was because he always felt that the coquettish Papa sounded very intimate, but the clear Dad sounded more distant. Here, he had to mention the little guy's growth experience. Because Aunt Zhang was from Sichuan, the little guy grew up with her, and inevitably there was a little Sichuan flavor in his accent. The teachers in the kindergarten were all from Shangjing, so their pronunciation was naturally the most standard Mandarin pronunciation. For the teachers, a child's inaccurate pronunciation was a big problem. Therefore, when they were in school, they would always patiently correct the little guy's pronunciation. Of course, he was gone, and then only Dad was left. In this regard, Qin Shi simply had to suffer in silence. There was a feeling of unspeakable bitterness. Bitter. Really bitter. Fortunately, other than this bitter matter, there was nothing else to worry about during this period. Although Qin Ring's cultivation progress was still very slow, Qin Shi was not anxious because of this. This was because he believed that as long as the adumbra flower was refined into a pill, Ying would definitely be able to use it to step into the diviner stage. However, how precious was the adumbra flower? In the absence of other materials, even he did not dare to act rashly. Therefore, after nearly a month of thinking, Qin Shi finally came up with a more feasible prescription and prepared to officially start refining the pill. However, at this moment, the spirit energy tide appeared again. In the blink of an eye, black clouds rolled and covered half the sky. After a few thunderous rumbles, the heavy rain began to fall. Qin Shi walked out of the room and frowned. After observing for a while, he realized that the tide this time was not very turbulent. The center was also rather far from Shangjing. Seeing this, Qin Shi looked as if he had seen something happy. After shaking his head with a smile, he turned around and went back into the room. He was prepared to stay by Qin Ruing's side and study her symptoms. The reason why Qin Shi did not immediately move to contain the tide was because he had reached an agreement with the old man. Therefore, the moment the spirit energy tide appeared, the entire Dayu Island was in an uproar. In just a moment, hundreds of diviners suddenly flew out of the island like birds, flying in flocks toward the center of the tide. It was as if hundreds of birds were flying through the sky. It was so majestic that it was a rare sight. Chapter 374. The celestial beings were out hunting, patrolling the heavens. Ever since Emperor Qin burned the books and buried the scholars, Such a grand event had not happened in the Divine Land for a long time. Diyu Island's magical formation was activated. Over 300 celestial beings rushed valiantly toward the center of the tide, facing the rolling black clouds, flashing lightning and rolling thunder. This moment was destined to be recorded in the annals of the Jiang clan. Because from this day on, the Jiang clan was no longer a clan of sinners abandoned by the divine ancestor. Under the leadership of the old ancestor, they would compose an epic that belonged to the Jiang clan in this divine great land that was once again filled with vitality. In fact, after the great ancestor made this decision, everyone knew what they were going to face. But at the same time, they also understood one thing, and that was, the strong often rose from humble beginnings. In front of the great world, the overall strength of Diyu Island was as insignificant as an ant. It could be said that any divine general from the Heavenly Gate had the ability to massacre the entire Diyu Island. After all, 300 celestial beings sounded like a lot, but they were only 300 pseudo-core immortal cultivators. They had not even truly condensed their Jindan. Of course, if these 300 celestial beings formed a formation and attacked and retreated together, even a divine general would not dare to face them head-on. However, this was only a theoretical concept. Because a divine general was not a wooden dummy. He only needed to employ guerrilla tactics. Through constant harassment, sneak attacks, and ambushes, how long would it take for him to kill 300 celestial beings? The gap between the two realms was simply too big. 1 against 100, 1 against 1,000. This was what an immortal cultivator should be capable of. If it had been in the past, the Jiang clan would definitely not have the delusion of going against the great world. They were just a lowly clan of sinners. When the spiritual energy was exhausted, they were like sand lizards wandering in the desert. They could only rely on eating maggots and rotten meat to sustain their lives. But suddenly, times had changed. With the continuous recovery of spiritual energy, the desert gradually became an oasis. Looking at the jackals, wolves, tigers, and leopards swarming toward the oasis, the sand lizards hesitated. Should they continue to live lowly, or should they stand up straight and fight the jackals, wolves, tigers, and leopards to protect the oasis that originally belonged to them? If he took a gamble, he might end up enraging the ferocious beast, and in the end, he would end up without a corpse. Then he could continue to hide in the soil for the rest of his life, eating maggots and rotting meat. Thank goodness. The Jiang clan still retained the last trace of bravery. So, even if they had to take the risk of their entire clan being annihilated, the Jiang clan still had to fight for that beautiful future under the lead of the old ancestor. Perhaps even the old ancestor didn't realize, their present conduct is a perfect reflection of the famous saying, natural selection, survival of the fittest. Compete with the heavens, compete with the earth, and compete with people. Competition was the unchanging truth in the hearts of the immortal cultivators. To Qin Shi, defeating the spirit Qi tide was just a small matter with a casual swing of his sword. But to the Jiang clan, this was a huge matter that could only be barely accomplished if they went all out. The center of the tide was not far from Diyu Island. Under Jiang Yuankue's guidance, the Jiang clan's celestials soon arrived at their destination. On a vast and boundless ocean. Because they moved quickly, they were fortunate enough to witness the occurrence of the heavenly anomaly. They saw a waterspout suddenly rising from the surface of the ocean. In just a short moment, the waterspout had already risen to the clouds and was tightly connected with the thunderclouds in the sky. From afar, the waterspout was like a pillar supporting the heavens and the earth by itself. Everyone was stunned. After all, this was the first time they witnessed a heavenly anomaly with their own eyes. In front of such a huge natural phenomenon, the 300-plus people were simply as insignificant as a speck of dust. Boom! Boom! Coupled with the deafening sound of thunder in the sky from time to time, many people started to have thoughts of retreating. The old ancestor wanted them to go against the heavens, faced with such a violent natural phenomenon, not to mention the others, even the leader, Jiang Yuankue, couldn't help but frown. However, just as everyone was hesitating, a figure suddenly plunged into the waterspout in front of him and then laughed out loud. A bunch of trash. A mere waterspout scared you all? Didn't you guys always want to know how I broke through? Then you all better watch carefully. The person who spoke was Jiang Jingqing, who had been beaten into the ground by Chen Shi a few days ago. After this period of recuperation, Jiang Jingqing's injuries had finally healed by 70 to 80%. He didn't expect that as soon as he appeared today, his wild and unruly nature would once again appear. Actually, among all the people present, Jiang Jingqing's talent wasn't the most outstanding, but he was the first Jiang clan member to step into the Heavenly Man realm. Therefore, everyone had always been curious as to how he had comprehended the key to it. However, curiosity was just curiosity. Due to Jiang Jingqing's annoying personality, no one had specifically asked him for advice. Who would have thought that he would actually take the initiative to say it today? In fact, how could Jiang Jingqing be talented? He must have a screw loose in his head. When a normal person saw such a shocking heavenly anomaly, their first reaction would definitely be to avoid it. However, Jiang Jingqing insisted on doing the opposite. No matter what kind of heavenly anomaly it was, he wanted to use this opportunity to train himself. His breakthrough stemmed from the spiritual energy tide that had appeared last time. It was just like how Yang Gui used the black iron heavy sword to practice swordsmanship under the waterfall, increasing his strength through resisting the waterfall. When the spiritual energy tide appeared last time, Jiang Jingqing just happened to be cultivating nearby. He felt that the spiritual energy in the center of the whirlpool was especially turbulent, so he dived in without thinking and stepped into the Heavenly Man realm in one go. There was definitely danger. After all, the spiritual energy in the center of the whirlpool was far superior to the outside world. If one's cultivation was insufficient or had an unstable foundation, they might suffer from chi deviation if they weren't careful. They might even explode and die because they couldn't withstand the enormous spiritual energy. However, for a cultivator like Jiang Jingqing who had been trapped in the Heavenly Man realm for many years due to the exhaustion of spiritual energy, how could this be dangerous? This was simply a great opportunity. Because his foundation had been tempered thousands of times, as long as there was enough spiritual energy of heaven and earth, he could condense a true golden core. In the past, the heavenly gate would always open with the spiritual energy tide. Everyone wanted to ascend to the great world through the heavenly gate, so they didn't realize at all, even if they didn't pass through the heavenly gate, they could use this opportunity to break through to the Heavenly Man realm. Therefore, with Jiang Jingqing as an example, everyone carefully flew into the center of the whirlpool. If the spiritual energy tide was compared to a cake, then Chen Shi used brute force to smash the cake into mud with one slap. Chapter 375. Under Jiang Jingqing's lead, the Jiang clan's celestials plunged into the world-shaking waterspout. After that, the 300-plus celestials began to resist the power of the whirlpool while crazily absorbing the spiritual energy within it. Their bodies were like the earth in the desert. Due to the lack of water, they had already cracked and collapsed. After the heaven and earth spirit chi surged like a flood, their bodies seemed to have turned from cracked earth into fertile fields. The rain nourished the earth, causing the long dried-up desert to once again grow green sprouts. Everyone experienced a feeling that they had never felt before from this. Carefree. It was truly carefree. The rich and pure spiritual chi of heaven and earth was like a bottle of iced cola. The instant they drank it, they could clearly feel. An incomparably cool feeling continuously entered their throat, then passed through their internal organs, the major acupoints all over their body, and finally reached their limbs, bones, and the ends of their bodies. But regrettably, the tide of spiritual energy was not very strong to begin with. Thus, after the 300-plus celestials crazily devoured it like maggots, the waterspout shrank at a speed visible to the naked eye. About half an hour later, the originally incomparably thick waterspout turned into a thin line of water. Then, it suddenly stopped rotating. Like a water ball that had been punctured, it collapsed in midair with a loud bang. Seawater continued to sprinkle down from the sky. The spiritual energy that had lost its restraints surged in all directions. Waves came one after another. In just a short while, Everything had returned to normal. Just like that. It's over? Jiang Yuankue sat cross-legged in midair. Even after the stormy waves had completely calmed down, he still had a feeling of endless aftertaste. One could not blame him for losing his composure. After all, this feeling was truly too refreshing. Too many people came today. There's not enough to share. All right, that's it then. Go back and properly enter seclusion for a while. Carefully savor the subtleties of this. You should be able to break through to Celestial very soon. Seeing that everyone seemed to want to continue, Jiang Jingqing, who had experienced it before, couldn't help but laugh proudly. After laughing for a while, Jiang Jingqing suddenly realized a problem. Perhaps the old ancestor had already anticipated the crux of the matter. That was why he made such a big show of making an enemy out of Tiandu? The tidal wave had already receded. The Jiang clan's heavenly clansmen stood up and prepared to return to Daiyu Island. Everyone seemed to be too preoccupied with the feeling just now, so even Jiang Jingqing didn't notice it. Not long after they left, a figure suddenly rose from the sea. This was a young man in his early 20s. He was wearing an extremely retro white robe, and his hair was tied up in a bun. Coupled with the aloof temperament that he inadvertently exuded, this young man simply looked like a talented scholar who had walked out of an ancient painting. But the slightly strange thing was, this person clearly came out of the sea, but there was not a single drop of water on his body. Furthermore, he didn't even make any movements of stepping on the water. His body just floated straight up to the surface of the sea. When more than half of his body was out of the water, the young man walked out of the water step by step as if he was climbing a flight of stairs. Then, he stood 2 to 3 meters above the water. Master, oh master, could it be that you've even calculated this step? That's why you let me stay in the lower realm alone? But if you leave, your disciple will feel terrible? Yuhuan Tianzuan is really something. It wasn't easy for me to find a voice transmission talisman in the Misty Pavilion. As soon as I opened it, I didn't even have time to tell you that I'm safe. He ordered me to teach that person a lesson. He even said that it was for the sake of Tiandu's reputation. That's easy for him to say. Even senior brother Baihong wasn't a match for that person. How would I dare to provoke him? All right, I know even if you don't say it, I can't go against the orders of the heavenly venerable. On this vast and boundless sea, apart from the constantly rising waves, there was probably only blue sky and white clouds left. It was obviously so lonely that even a bird could not be seen, but this young man was still looking up, as if he was talking to someone. Although you can't hear it, but I still want to say, Yuhuan Tianzuan, oh Yuhuan Tianzuan, Wu Shu's abilities are weak. I really can't provoke that person, so I can only trouble you to come down and deal with him personally. As he spoke, the young man looked in the direction that Jiang Jingqing and the rest left. Then, as if taking a stroll in the park, he slowly walked in that direction. There's an old saying, pick the soft persimmons to pinch. Apart from waving flags and shouting battle cries, I seem to be able to help you get rid of these eyesores? Forget it, no matter how small a mosquito is, it's still meat, so that you won't find another reason to say that I'm disobedient and disrespectful. The young man's speed seemed slow, but in fact, it was extremely fast. Even though Jiang Jingqing and the rest flew at full speed, they never left the young man's line of sight. And the scariest thing was Jiang Jingqing and the rest were tailed, but among the 300 people, not a single one noticed this mysterious young man. They soon arrived at Daiyu Island. After Jiang Jingqing and the rest entered the formation, they disappeared into thin air. At this moment, the young man looked at the vast ocean in front of him and couldn't help but mumble, "Is this the Big Dipper formation passed down from ancient times? No wonder I couldn't find the right place." As he spoke, the young man walked to the edge of the formation. Without seeing him do anything, a golden light screen appeared out of thin air. The young man stood outside the light screen and stretched his neck to look inside. Then he walked in with a smile on his face. Then Daiyu Island, which was like a paradise, was completely revealed in front of him. The young man had just arrived, so he couldn't find his way. He couldn't tell which island was the main one. Therefore, he went to the nearest island and strolled along the beach. After walking for a while, a group of children playing on the beach noticed him. The leader was a 17 or 18-year-old boy. The boy was quite alert. When he saw the young man's strange clothes, he frowned and called out to him. "Stuff for you." Hearing that, the young man immediately stopped in his tracks. He first looked at the group of children in front of him, then smiled and replied, "Me? I'm Wushu. You wouldn't know me even if I told you, so I think I might as well not tell you." "You're an outsider?" The boy looked at him in shock. Not long ago, there was a muddled incident where an outsider suddenly climbed Chisha Peak. Therefore, Diyu Island was under martial law recently. Therefore, when the boy came back to his senses, he immediately turned to his companion and said, "Little Six, go to the guard hall and tell them we found an outsider. Tell them to—" The boy didn't finish his sentence, because the young man suddenly attacked. He just waved his sleeve casually, and a huge force sent more than 10 children flying. After flying for more than 10 meters, the children fell heavily into the sea. No one knew if they were dead or alive. Note: Chapter 376. Even though he was facing a group of half-grown children, the man who called himself Wushu still attacked them. He did not seem to think that there was anything wrong with what he did. After sending the children flying into the sea, he even looked at the sea with disdain and muttered, "How rude." After that, he continued walking toward the depths of the island without looking back. As he went deeper into the island, he encountered more and more Jiang clan members along the way. However, regardless of whether they were male or female, old or young, Wushu would raise his sleeve and send them flying with a slap. The only thing worth rejoicing about was, judging from the state of these people after they fell, Wushu did not seem to have killed them. He only knocked them out. He did not walk very fast, but he walked straight toward the depths of the island. Therefore, he soon arrived at the square in the center of the island. This island was only one of the 17 sub-islands of Diyu Island. The people on this island were also from the branch clan. Finally, after Wushu failed to knock everyone out with a slap, his actions had completely alarmed the entire Diyu Island. The sudden sound of the enemy attack bell was like a muffled thunder that exploded in the sky above Diyu Island. Bam! 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 Jiang Jingqing and the others had just returned to Chisha Peak. At this moment, they were gathered together to discuss their experiences. After hearing the sound of the bell, one of the heavenly beings immediately stood up and said with a frown, "The forbidden bell of Xioshan Island has rung. I'll go back and take a look first." After saying that, the ancestor of the branch clan, Jiang Diheo, rushed out of the ancestral hall and flew toward Xioshan Island. After he left, Jiang Yuankui looked at the others with a puzzled expression and asked, "Mr. Chen has already reached an agreement with the ancestor. I don't think he'll be an enemy of the Jiang clan anymore. But other than him, who else in the world would dare to cause trouble on Diyu Island now?" Jiang Yuankui slowly scanned the entire place. However, everyone seemed to still be reminiscing about the spirit tide just now. Therefore, many of them even had faint smiles on their faces. However, they could not be blamed for being arrogant. After all, this was the most powerful time in the past 1,000 years for the Jiang clan. More than 300 celestials. The last time Qin came to cause trouble, everyone was still in seclusion on Heron Island, so even Qin had not truly seen the Jiang clan's foundation. Now that everyone had just returned from the spirit chi tide, all the celestials were gathered at Serene Afterglow Peak, but there were still some ignorant fellows who dared to jump out and cause trouble. Isn't this the same as hanging an old man? Is he tired of living? Therefore, when Jiang Diheo got up and went to Xioshan Island, the others completely forgot about this matter and continued to talk about the topic of cultivation in 2s and 3s. Because in everyone's mind, Jiang Diheo alone was enough to suppress all the unbridled troublemakers. Xioshan Island was only a few kilometers away from the main island. Jiang Diheo soon arrived above Xioshan Island and saw the troublemaker. But that person didn't have any intention of hiding at all. He just stood in the middle of the square and slightly raised his head to look at him. Seeing this, Jiang Diheo immediately flew into a rage and scolded sternly, Which child dares to cause trouble on my Dayu island? Why aren't you surrendering now? Perhaps this old man can still spare your life." After saying that, Jiang Diheo flew directly toward that person, ready to take him down and slowly interrogate him. At this time, Wu Shu, who had been standing in the middle of the square in a daze, finally seemed to have seen something interesting. He couldn't help but mutter to himself, "I've been holding back for so long, and now I can finally move my muscles and bones." While muttering, Wu Shu raised his right hand. Then, a small yellow flag suddenly appeared in his hand. If one ignored the workmanship of the flag and the exquisite and complicated patterns on the flag, he really looked like a member of an elderly tour group, which was simply too low. Jiang Diheo didn't know why Wu Shu suddenly had a small flag in his hand, and he only thought that this young man was playing a trick. That was because he didn't know that there was actually a magic treasure in this world, called Sumeru mustard bag. Born like a mustard seed, there's a Sumeru, and the heart like a speck of dust, there's a big world inside. The Sumeru mustard bag, also known as the interspatial storage bag, was a magic treasure that could only be refined by cultivators at the Dongshu stage. This magic treasure involved the profound meaning of the word void. It seemed to be only the size of a palm, but in reality, it could contain objects ranging from a few cubic meters to dozens of cubic meters. It was really a magical treasure that was necessary for traveling, killing, and arson. Chen Shi used to have one, but unfortunately, he accidentally lost it on his way back. If Chen Shi was here right now, and saw the treasure in this person's hands with her own eyes, even if he was as powerful as he would no longer underestimate his opponent. Instead, he would use 120% of his strength to fight the next battle. This was a very simple principle. One could roughly judge a person's worth from the way they traveled, and it was the same for cultivators. Only cultivators at the Dongshu stage could refine the Sumeru mustard bag, and the materials needed were very rare. Naturally, it couldn't be something that could be found on the streets. Bai Hong didn't have it, and neither did Shui Xiong. However, this young man named Wu Shu had it. This also meant that, no matter what his cultivation was, his status in the outside world was higher than Bai Hong's. Chen Shi understood this principle, but Jiang Diheo didn't. Therefore, the moment he rushed towards Wu Shu also waved the small yellow flag in his hand. At that moment, Jiang Diheo didn't sense any fluctuation of spiritual energy, so he was even a little curious about what this young man was doing. However, the next second, the whole ground cracked open. The floor of the square collapsed and shattered, and hundreds of earth spikes suddenly protruded from the ground. From afar, it looked like a hedgehog, and all the spikes on its body were aimed at Jiang Diheo in the air. Jiang Diheo didn't have time to react at all, and these hundreds of earth spikes all shot towards him. The speed of the earth spikes was very strange. Once they shot out, they covered the sky above the square. No! After a wail, Jiang Diheo's figure completely disappeared. The earth spikes turned into dust and leisurely sprinkled down, mixed with a particularly dazzling rain of blood. After the smoke and dust dispersed, this terrifying young man held the small flag, and then laughed and said to the Jiang clansman who rang the forbidden bell, "Ring it again, remember to ring it a little louder, or else I'm afraid they won't hear it." From beginning to end, his body didn't move at all. He just lightly waved the small flag in his hand, and with the power of the small flag, he instantly obliterated a celestial being. It was obvious that this small flag was also a magic treasure. But it was different from Bai Hong's flowing cloud sword and Shui Xiang's blue wave silk gauze. The small flag in Wu Shu's hand had once appeared in the legends of Huaxia, and it had a well-known name, namely Chapter 377. The Central Wuji Apricot Flag. If one added the Eastern Green Lotus Flag, the Southern Floating Flame Flag, the Western White Cloud Boundary Flag, and the Northern Jinwu Eagle Flag. These 5 flags formed a set of killing weapons that had once appeared in the myths and legends of Huaxia, the Khanate 5-element flags. Ever since Qin Shi learned about the deeds of the ancient cultivators from the old man, he had a basic understanding of these myths and legends, and that was, these myths and legends were more or less based on evidence, so their reputation had been passed down from ancient times until now. Of course, the real Khanate five-element flags was definitely not as exaggerated as the myths and legends described, but it was definitely considered an extremely powerful set of Dharma treasures. In addition, the Khanate five-element flags was truly praiseworthy not because of its quality, but because it was a set. Because it was a set of Dharma treasures, not one. The Wuji apricot flag was only one of them. It could be freely disassembled and combined. This was the advantage of a set of Dharma treasures, but at the same time, it was also an unavoidable disadvantage of a set of Dharma treasures. Based on Qin Shi's experience, after gathering all 5 flags, the Khanate five-element flags could at least reach the quality of a supreme treasure, which was the same level as his heaven derivation sword. But because it was not pure enough, the Khanate five-element flags could never be compared to the heaven derivation sword. But then again, a supreme treasure was still a supreme treasure. Even if the 5 flags were disassembled, just the central Wuji apricot flag alone should be able to reach the level of a high-grade spirit treasure. What was a spirit treasure? Above a Dharma treasure was a spirit treasure. When Qin Shi had just returned, he had used 3 inferior Guanyin statues to refine 3 defensive Dharma treasures. But in a real sense, these 3 Guanyin pendants did not reach the standard of a Dharma treasure at all. At best, they could only be considered the lowest level of inferior Dharma artifacts. After all, at that time, Qin Shi had no cultivation and no materials, so the Guanyin pendants that he forcibly refined would naturally not be good treasures. Dharma artifacts, Dharma treasures, spirit treasures, supreme treasures, and extremely rare Khanate supreme treasures. According to their quality, they could be divided into 9 grades. Grade 1 was the lowest, and Grade 9 was the highest. The reason why he didn't mention magic treasures before was because it was impossible to find the materials to refine magical weapons on Earth. Refining magical weapons was an extremely difficult task, not to mention magical weapons with many wonderful uses. Bai Hong's sword, Qing Luan's spear, and Shui Xiang's damask could all be considered as high-quality magic treasures. Bai Hong's sword was quite handy, so Qin Shi did not destroy it. Therefore, he chose to smelt Qing Luan's spear and used the smelted materials to refine a set of defensive magic equipment. In addition to Nian Yan's bracelet necklace, Qin Shi later gave Lin Xian a self-defense pendant. Of course, heavenly materials and earthly treasures were all unique. Therefore, after smelting the magic treasure and then using the raw materials to refine a new magic treasure, if new materials were not added during this period, then the quality of the new magic treasure would plummet after it was formed. For example, Qing Luan's spear was originally grade 8, but after being smelted by Qin Shi, the new necklace could only barely reach grade 5. And this was a manifestation of Qin Shi's considerable knowledge in refining weapons. Magic treasures were like weapons in the hands of ordinary people. The better the weapon, the stronger the combat power. Even if a child picked up an AK, he could easily kill a group of unarmed adults. It was precisely because of this. From the moment Wushu took out the central Wuji apricot yellow flag, Daiyu Island was destined to be set off a bloody storm. Dong, 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 dong. The rapid and loud forbidden bell rang through the sky again. This time, all the Jiang clan's people sitting in the ancestral hall were stunned. Jiang Diheo could not even handle such a small matter. Just now, the bell had only rung 9 times, which meant that someone had invaded and reinforcements were needed. But now, the bell rang like a storm, and it had rung a total of 36 times. This meant that the situation had deteriorated to the point where it was out of control, and the entire clan urgently needed to face it together. Let's go and take a look. This time, before Jiang Yuankue could say anything, Jiang Jingqing could not sit still anymore. After all, no matter what, he was still a member of the Jiang clan. No matter how much a family quarreled behind closed doors, they were still a family. Now that the Jiang clan was being trampled on, how could Jiang Jingqing sit still and do nothing? After Jiang Jingqing rushed out of the ancestral hall, the rest of the people reacted and quickly followed behind him, flying straight toward Xiushan Island. The Celestials were on patrol, hunting everywhere. Many of the Jiang clan's juniors were more or less trembling when they heard the forbidden bell ringing one after another. They were afraid that the enemy would suddenly appear in front of them. Thus, when they saw hundreds of their ancestors flying over the island, they immediately stood on the ground and cheered crazily as if they had been injected with chicken blood. This scene deeply demonstrated the meaning of the military parade. A clan or even a country would only feel excited and proud when they displayed their strength in front of the people. The dignity of Diyu Island, it would not allow anyone to trample on it. Jiang Jingqing's speed was very fast, and he almost instantly arrived above Xiushan Island. The young man was still standing in the same place, looking up at the sky. Only Jiang Dihao was nowhere to be seen. But how sharp was Jiang Jingqing's sense of smell? When he sensed that there was still a trace of blood in the air, Jiang Jingqing was about to explode in anger. Obviously, Jiang Dihao had died in the hands of this person, so the 36 forbidden bells were rung on Xiushan Island. Arrogant brat, die. Unlike the last time when he fought with Qin Shi, Jiang Jingqing underestimated his opponent and did not even have the chance to show half of his strength before he was smashed into the ground by Qin Shi. This time, in a fit of rage, Jiang Jingqing really showed his full strength. Therefore, when he let out a furious roar, the clothes on his body suddenly puffed up without any wind. His head of black hair also swayed crazily, as if he was in the eye of the storm. Surging true core energy gathered in his palms, and Jiang Jingqing's hands suddenly became like two searchlights, exceptionally bright. Then, he slapped his palm toward the young man on the ground from afar. True 6 trigrams formula, mountain breaking all. A ray of golden energy suddenly shot out from his palm, as if it was the Buddha's palm. At this moment, Wushu, who had been standing on the ground, looked as if he had seen something new. He squinted his eyes slightly, and then waved the yellow flag in his hand. When the yellow flag was waved, the ground shook. 2 extremely thick mud pillars suddenly emerged from the ground, and then turned into 2 extremely thick arms. From bottom to top, they directly rushed toward Jiang Jingqing in the sky. Jiang Jingqing did not expect this young man's cultivation level to be so high. The mountain breaking all that he had used all his strength only shattered a corner of the mud pillars, and did not even slow down the opponent's attack. The 2 mud pillars were like the arms of a giant, hard and flexible at the same time. Chapter 378. It was hard to describe what it was like. It was just a pile of soil mixed with sand and stones, but it was like a living creature that could move freely and pounce on its prey. Jiang Jingqing was obviously playing the role of the prey. The mud pillars emerged from the ground and shot into the sky like poisonous snakes pouncing on their prey. They were incredibly fast. The strength of the mud pillars surprised Jiang Jingqing. While he was in a daze, the mud pillars had already reached him. After Jiang Jingqing reacted, he immediately retreated into the sky. But the scary thing was, the speed at which the 2 mud pillars rose was even faster than his flying speed. In a flash, the mud pillars had caught up with Jiang Jingqing. After all, this was already the second time he had been chased to the point of fleeing in such a sorry state. Jiang Jingqing could not help but feel angry when he thought of all the things that had happened to him after his breakthrough. He was a heavenly being after all. It was fine when he faced Mr. Chen's flying immortal sword. But now, he was being chased all over the sky by 2 mud pillars. Did they really think that he was a heavenly being and a paper tiger? Jiang Jingqing decided not to dodge anymore. He was ready to take the attack head-on. In an instant, Jiang Jingqing was like a god descending to earth. The golden light around him shone brightly, almost illuminating half of Xiushan Island. 6 trigram calming mind, concealment of spirit and qi. The moment the protective shield appeared, 2 mud pillars, one on the left and one on the right, smashed into Jiang Jingqing's body. Bang! A loud noise reverberated in the sky above Diyu Island. The surging true core dispersed in all directions due to the violent collision, causing a strong gust of wind to blow across Xiushan Island. Wushu stood calmly on the ground and looked up at the situation from afar. He could not help but smile faintly. They were too weak. He did not even need to do anything. The power of the Wuji apricot yellow flag alone was enough to massacre the entire Diyu Island. Wushu thought about whether he should speed up as he turned to look at the heavenly beings of the Jiang clan. But just as he was about to wave the apricot yellow flag again, Jiang Jingqing's slightly hurried roar suddenly rang out. This kid's Dharma treasure is too powerful. Retreat, retreat, retreat. It wasn't difficult to discern that his voice clearly carried a trace of shock and terror. Obviously, he was terrified by the might of the Wuji apricot yellow flag. Jiang Jingqing had quite a bit of prestige in the clan. After hearing his incessantly trembling shout, the Jiang clan's celestials naturally did not dare to rashly advance. They could only hurriedly retreat several miles. At this time, Jiang Jingqing turned into a stream of light and flew out of the square, rushing back to the crowd. If it wasn't for the ancestor bestowing me with a protective magic treasure a few days ago, I'm afraid I would have been dead by now. After Jiang Jingqing safely returned to Jiang Yuankuei's side, he panted heavily and said to Jiang Yuankuei. As he spoke, Jiang Jingqing even passed a jade pendant to Jiang Yuankuei. This jade pendant was a protective magic treasure passed down from ancient times. If Jiang Yan hadn't been the first to break through to the celestial being realm, the old ancestor Jiang Yan wouldn't have given him this jade pendant. But now, he hadn't even warmed up the jade pendant when 4 or 5 extremely clear cracks appeared on it. Clearly, it was on the verge of breaking apart. The might of a single attack was actually so terrifying. At this time, if Jiang Yuankuei still didn't understand the seriousness of the matter, then he would truly be the clan chief for nothing. Therefore, after exchanging a glance with Jiang Jingqing, Jiang Yuankuei abruptly raised his right hand and shouted, "The enemy is here. Everyone, please form the Yin-Yang 6 directions formation with me." After saying that, the Jiang clan celestials immediately formed groups of 6 and surrounded Xiushan Island Square in all directions. Over 300 celestials. How magnificent of a scene would that be? But Wushu acted as if he was watching a monkey show. Even though he was surrounded, there was still a faint smile on his face. When the golden light of the serene afterglow peak soared into the clouds and the heavenly stars formation was completely activated, Wushu slowly flew into the air under the gazes of the crowd. At this moment, the entire crowd was silent. Jiang Yuankuei did not say anything. While everyone was waiting in formation, they were also silently examining the mysterious young man in front of them. Finally, Wushu was the first to speak, breaking the silence. "I am the Divine General of Tiandu, Wushu. Under the orders of Yuhuan Tianzuan, I have specially come to condemn you all." No one answered him, because when they heard the 2 words Tiandu, all kinds of complicated expressions appeared on their faces. Wushu was not in a hurry to continue speaking. He only slowly swept his gaze over the crowd. But those who were swept by his gaze involuntarily lowered their heads, not daring to look at him. At this moment, Wushu was simply like Kangxi in disguise. When he announced his name, everyone was stunned by his identity. Tiandu. For the Jiang clan's clansmen, that was a distant place, a place that they yearned for day and night. But now, under the lead of their ancestor, they took the initiative to go against Tiandu. Wasn't this a rebellion? You are merely descendants of sinners, but the divine ancestor thought of the bitter cold of the lower realm, so he spared you all and allowed you to ascend to the upper realm. In the blink of an eye, the divine ancestor has already passed away. You all do not know how to cherish the divine ancestor's kindness. Instead, you all think of ways to destroy the foundations of the divine ancestor and prevent the divine ancestor from opening. This crime is unforgivable. When Wushu was alone, he would always talk nonsense like a crazy person. That was why their teacher always said that he would not grow up and was far from Baihong. But when he was serious, his body would erupt with a powerful aura that was enough to suffocate people. He just silently floated in the air. Every word he said was like a heavy hammer, smashing into everyone's chest. Everyone lowered their heads in silence. They were all waiting for their ancestor to speak, but for some reason, their ancestor did not do anything today. Only Jiang Jingqing. After taking a deep look at the jade pendant in his hand, he spat at Wu Su angrily. Then he scolded sternly, "Arrogant brat. After calling us sinners every time you open your mouth, Dare I ask what our Jiang clan has done wrong? Hearing this, Wushu chuckled. Just as he was about to reply, Jiang Jingqing continued, "Don't talk to me about the upper and lower realms. I have seen all the changes in the world. In the past, when Tiandu was strong, the Jiang clan could only become sinners and be trapped in this bitter cold. Didn't you all look down on the lower realm? Why are you here today? I think you know that too. Things are different now. Jinling's jade tree is famous, Qinhuai's waterside pavilion blooms early, but who knew that it would disappear so easily? I saw him build a vermilion tower, I saw him host guests, and I saw him collapse. I think you all are grasshoppers after autumn. You won't be able to jump around for long." Hearing this, the smile on Wu Su's face disappeared. After coldly looking at Jiang Jingqing, Wu Shu raised the apricot yellow flag in his hand again. Seeing this, the Jiang clan immediately acted as if they were facing a great enemy. As long as Jiang Yuankue gave the order, they would attack at the same time. They had to kill him instantly. Don't tell me you all really think that destroying the five-directional holy palace and extracting the spiritual energy foundation can stop the gate of heaven from opening? That's wishful thinking. How foolish. Today, I will say this, because of what you all have done today, when the gate of heaven reopens, it will be the time when this world will be plunged into misery and suffering. When autumn comes on the 8th day of the 9th month, all flowers will be killed. Chapter 379. Xiushan Island was in a mess. 300 celestial beings stood in formation. Everyone stared at the young man in the sky above the square from afar. Divine General. After hearing his last sentence, Jiang Jingqing knew that he couldn't let him continue. There was no point in saying more. If a random Divine General was enough to make everyone cower in fear, wouldn't the Jiang clan go for wool and come home shorn? Therefore, Jiang Jingqing hesitated for a while. Then, a fierce look flashed across his face. He walked past Jiang Yuankue and ordered everyone, "Formation!" In that instant, the mountains rumbled, the valleys responded, and the wind blew. Dust swirled, and flags fluttered. How magnificent was the sight of 300 celestial beings! No matter how arrogant Wu Shu was, facing such a large number of enemies, he had to be on full alert. For the first time, his body showed signs of true yuan fluctuation. Attack! Jiang Jingqing didn't give Wu Shu too much time to prepare. After giving the order, he ordered everyone to attack with all their might. The surging Zhen Yuan gushed toward Wu Shu like a torrential flood. Seeing this, Wu Shu did not have any intention of running away. Because at this moment, he was the Divine General of Tiandu. He represented Tiandu to punish the sinners. If he ran away, where would Tiandu's face be? He could not back down from this battle. "Come on, let me take a look. What gave you the courage to go against Tiandu?" Wu Shu was so angry that his hair and beard fluttered. He roared into the sky. The yellow flag in his hand was like a balloon. It expanded at a speed visible to the naked eye. At the same time, he quickly took out a pill from his summer mustard seed bag and stuffed it into his mouth. Xianyang snow-melting pill. This pill was a 9th grade spirit pill. Its effect was that when a cultivator burned their essence blood, the effect of the essence blood would be greatly enhanced. This would allow the cultivator to explode with power far greater than before. The 9th grade Central Wuji apricot yellow flag in one hand and the 9th grade Xianyang snow-melting pill in the other. Wu Shu's combat power was not inferior to Qin Shi's. Therefore, just as the Jiang clan's attack was about to arrive, the yellow flag in Wu Shu's hand exploded with a dazzling yellow light. The light was so bright that it almost dyed the entire sky. The 5 direction flags, Earth is supreme. Heaven Empress Earth, Heaven Empress, Heaven pure will not fail. With a wave of the flag, the entire earth trembled. Countless mud pillars suddenly extended from the ground and turned into a huge mud wall, surrounding Wu Shu. The attacks of the Jiang clan's celestials all landed on the earth wall. Boom, 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 boom. Dust flew everywhere, and sand and gravel flew everywhere. Huge explosions sounded in the sky above Xiushan Island one after another. That scene, It was like an air raid during World War II. The rumbling did not stop for even a moment. In truth, Jiang Jingqing was well aware that the other party's strength far surpassed his own. Therefore, if they did not make use of their numerical advantage, they would have no hope at all. Therefore, after the first round of attacks, Jiang Jingqing didn't wait for everyone to catch their breath before he roared fiercely, "Don't stop! Beat him up! Even if we have to destroy Xiushan Island today, we must bury this bastard here. Jiang family, prosper without decline." At this moment, the ancestral 6-trigram incantation of the Jiang clan could be considered to have completely bloomed. They were the origin of the necromancers and also the masters of the Tao of sorcery. Therefore, all kinds of 5 elemental sorcery were like a storm, smashing towards the center of the square. One round after another, as if there would never be a day of rest. Finally, some people had to stop temporarily because they had used up too much energy. However, they stopped in the air and gasped for breath. Because Jiang Jingqing was a level higher than everyone else, when everyone had no choice but to stop, he was still crazily attacking the center of the square. The dust raised by the explosions blocked everyone's sight. From afar, the entire sky above Xiushan Island was filled with a layer of dust, as if a sandstorm was coming. Second granduncle, stop. Seeing Jiang Jingqing continuously attacking like a madman, Jiang Yuankue quickly reached out to stop him. Although Jiang Yuankue did not want to believe that this person would be so stupid as to stand in the center and let them attack as they wished. But the truth was right in front of him. There were no signs of true essence fluctuations in the air above the square. However, out of caution, Jiang Yuankue did not immediately go forward to check the situation. Instead, he continued to wait patiently outside. Under Jiang Yuankue's persuasion, Jiang Jingqing finally stopped. However, after he took 2 deep breaths, he frowned and said with a serious face, I think something is wrong," as expected. Before Jiang Jingqing finished speaking, a burst of bright light suddenly exploded in the center of the square. Immediately after, Wushu's voice was heard again. "You guys, is that all you've got?" Suddenly, a gust of wind came from nowhere. After the smoke dissipated, Wushu's figure appeared in front of everyone's eyes again. "Could it be that you guys have been in the lower realm for too long, so you don't even know how to fight? If that's the case, why don't you just bind yourselves and ask me to be lenient?" If Wushu was a fully armed modern special force, then the Jiang family was simply a primitive warrior who only knew how to rely on brute force to fight. After all, it was because the earth had been desolate for too long that civilization had degenerated to a primitive society. Spells, pills, talismans, refining weapons, setting up formations, and poison. Other than the spell inheritance that had not been cut off, what was left of the Jiang family? It could be said that this was a war between a modern civilization and a primitive society. In fact, the Wuji apricot yellow flag was not a killing magic treasure at all. Instead, it was mainly used for defense like Shui Xiang silk satin. Therefore, when the Jiang family attacked, Wushu only needed to hide under the protection of the Wuji apricot yellow flag. If the enemy advances, I will retreat. If the enemy stays, I will disturb. If the enemy is tired, I will attack. If the enemy retreats, I will chase. The 16 words formula for guerrilla warfare, even in the Immortal cultivation world, was an absolutely correct tactic. Unfortunately, there was no one in the entire Jiang family who knew about magic treasures, so everyone could only waste their energy. It was time for Wushu to show his power. He waved the Wuji apricot yellow flag in his hand, and 4 giant natives made of mud suddenly emerged from the ground, then attacked the Jiang family members in all directions. With the natives holding back, Wushu completely transformed into a war god, holding the apricot yellow flag and rushing towards Jiang Jingqing's direction. To catch bandits, first catch the leader. Seeing Wushu's aggressive momentum, Jiang Jingqing and Jiang Yuankue could not help but be shocked. Even if they were at their peak, they would not be able to fight against Wushu. Now that they had lost more than half of their strength, how would they dare to fight Wushu head-on? Without even needing to communicate, the two flew in different directions, preparing to temporarily avoid the attack. Seeing this, Wushu could not help but laugh. "Where do you run to?" As his voice fell, Wushu waved the apricot yellow flag in his hand and directly sent out 2 waves of true origin towards the back of the 2. Just at this critical juncture, a wave of true origin suddenly shot out from the forest below, like a sharp arrow, and directly shot towards Wushu in the sky. Jiang Jingqing felt something strange behind him. Looking back, he just happened to see that wave of true origin pass through Wushu's body and drew a thin line of blood in the air. Jiang Jingqing widened his eyes and only felt that his mind was blank. Chapter 380. The Old Ancestor Came? Once those words were said, everyone seemed to have been injected with chicken blood. A trace of indescribable excitement immediately appeared on their faces. After all, the old ancestor Jiang Yan was the current spiritual totem of the Jiang clan. Now that the Jiang clan raised the flag and wanted to become enemies with Tiandu, everyone was fighting fiercely. Only the old ancestor was nowhere to be seen, so it was inevitable that everyone would have doubts in their hearts. They could clearly choose to ascend to the higher realms, so why did they have to go against Tiandu? What was the reason? In reality, everyone knew very well why the old ancestor did this. But as long as the old ancestor did not appear, this question would always linger like a nightmare, forever shrouding everyone's heart. The most frightening thing in a battle was to lose morale. Luckily, the old ancestor finally appeared. The spiritual totem was erected again, and everyone's heart was filled with an extremely strong fighting spirit, causing the slightly dispirited morale to instantly soar to the peak. The majestic Jiang clan, flourishing without decline. The giant natives summoned by Wushu had no life to begin with, and each one of them had to face the encirclement of dozens of celestials. Thus, under the continuous encirclement of everyone, the natives could only collapse one by one, turning into a pile of rubble and mud that fell to the ground again. Then, the celestials of the Jiang clan who had freed up their hands immediately turned towards Wushu's direction, firmly surrounding him in the center. Back to Wushu's side. As one of the best 1,000-year-old Go in Qinshi's heart, Jiang Yan was indeed very patient. He already knew everything that happened on the island, but he still did not immediately stand out to lead everyone to besiege Wushu. Instead, he allowed everyone to suffer a huge loss at Wushu's hands. He was Go, and also waiting. Just waiting for the moment Wushu let down his guard, and then launching a fatal attack. For a smart person, 10,000 meaningless attacks were clearly not as effective as a single fatal attack. Just in terms of cultivation, Jiang Yan, who had lived for over 1,000 years, was clearly stronger than Wushu. Thus, when he steeled his heart to launch a sneak attack, even with the protection of the Wuji apricot yellow flag, Wushu was still unable to completely dodge the attack. But fortunately, Wu Su reacted very quickly. Furthermore, his clothes were defensive magic treasures. Therefore, the killing move that Jiang Yan had been holding back for a long time only managed to cut off a piece of flesh from his waist. Immortal cultivators did have the ability to regenerate broken limbs. But this takes time to recover slowly. It is impossible to be like Wolverine and Deadpool, whose bodies were clearly chopped into minced meat, but it didn't take long for them to return to their original appearance. That was unscientific. For immortal cultivators, the body was merely a vessel, while the soul was the absolute core. However, once they lost the protection of the vessel, their divine soul would gradually weaken until it completely disappeared from the world. Therefore, for high-level immortal cultivators, the physical body was also an extremely important part of them. It was absolutely impossible for them to abandon it easily. This was the first time Wushu had suffered such a serious injury. Wushu lowered his head and looked at the wound on his waist. His face was as cold as a poker card. He silently took out a healing pill from his summer mustard seed bag and swallowed it. Then, he turned his gaze to the forest below. Subsequently, a figure slowly flew into the air under Wushu's gaze. Jiang Yuankue took a closer look. After seeing the person's appearance, he couldn't help but exclaim, "Feng Yan? Why are you here?" Because of the previous act of snatching the Adumbra flower, Jiang Fengyan had been punished by the old ancestor to meditate in the dry pool, so Jiang Yuankui didn't expect to see his son here. However, Jiang Zhengqing immediately figured out the reason, so he immediately cupped his hands and saluted. Zhengqing greets the old ancestor. After hearing this, Jiang Yuankui was stunned on the spot. At this time, he finally reacted. Jiang Yan, Jiang Fengyan. It was only a difference of one word, but their identities were worlds apart. Jiang Fengyan was a direct descendant of the Jiang family, so the only similarity between the two was probably the blood flowing in their bodies. Bloodline possession. It must be a bloodline possession. The old ancestor forcibly took away Jiang Fengyan's body and erased his divine soul at the same time. Yuankui, the Jiang family has reached a critical moment of life and death. This old man has to do this. If I don't do this, not only Fengyan, but even you and the tens of thousands of Jiang family members on Daiyu Island will die in the hands of this person. I hope you can figure this out and don't hold a grudge because of this. Jiang Fengyan flew to the side of the two, then said this to Jiang Yuankui through voice transmission. After hearing this, Jiang Yuankui looked up to the sky and screamed in extreme pain. Then, as if he had gone mad, he turned around and flew in the direction of Qisha Peak. Yuankui? Seeing this, Jiang Zhengqing stepped forward to stop Jiang Yuankui. However, before he could turn around, Jiang Fengyan directly called out to him. Zhengqing, the enemy is right in front of us. Don't be distracted. After this matter, I will explain to him. I only hope that Yuankui can understand my painstaking efforts. Since the old ancestor had said so, Jiang Zhengqing naturally couldn't say anything more, so he could only nod and respond, yes. The three of them seemed to have said a lot, but in fact, they used the secret method of voice transmission. Therefore, from Wushu's injury to Jiang Fengyan's appearance, only a few breaths had passed. And at this time, Wushu also used a spiritual pill to stop his injury. Bloodline possession, is it? Come on, then let me see. Old man, other than sneak attacks, what else do you have? If Wushu was an elegant young master before, then at this moment he had already become an injured beast. So, after a roar, Wushu picked up the apricot yellow flag and pounced directly at Jiang Yan. Seeing this, Jiang Yan did not retreat. Instead, he suddenly made hand signs and shouted loudly, I am Jiang Yan, the ancestor of the illustrious clan, listen to my orders. Following his order, the Jiang clan's celestials present all made hand signs one after another. Jiang Yan was at the core of the formation, and he felt hundreds of huge true essences constantly surging towards him. And the power of the Yin-Yang Six Directions formation was truly displayed after he, the backbone, appeared. Brilliant heavenly might, transform into divine thunder. 6 lines of space, rebuking without arrogance. In an instant, lightning appeared in the void, and heavenly thunder rumbled. Jiang Yan held the thunder in his hand, and his eyes were wide open in anger, as if a god had descended. Let me emphasize again. This is not an entertainment stay-at-home dad, nor a restaurant stay-at-home dad. This is returning from cultivation to become a stay-at-home dad. The theme determines that I can't be a daily life, and the main storyline is not changed at all, right? As a dignified soul formation cultivator, isn't it too ridiculous to go to the entertainment industry? I have my own main storyline, my own plot arrangement, but when it was published, because I was too concerned about the reader's comments, I lost myself. Before, I even mistakenly thought that cultivation and stay-at-home dad were conflicting. Until now, only then did I realize what was going on. I am not money, I can't make everyone like me. I can only do my best to write the story I want to write. If you think it is good, please recommend it to your friends after reading it. If you think it is not good, then please put it aside and find another book you like to read. I only hope that we can meet again in the future. Because this is only my first book, and definitely not my last. I have always been working hard to improve myself, hoping that I can write better in the future so that you will be satisfied. Sincerely. In addition, the part about Nyen will not be lost and will instead be written better, because when I think of the later plot, I feel that I have found the surging passion I had when I first opened the book. Since I am a cultivation stay-at-home dad, then I will bring out the characteristics of a cultivation stay-at-home dad. Don't mention the word stay-at-home dad, everyone will think of the same thing. Chapter 381. Yin and Yang, 5 elements, 6 lines, 8 trigrams. The 5 elements reinforced and restrained each other. The 5 elements did not simply refer to the 5 elements of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. It referred to a cultivator's basic understanding of the laws of heaven and earth. Only by understanding the 5 elements, Yin and Yang, could one officially step into the door of immortality. Among the 5 elements, thunder represented the Zhen trigram, which was wood. Even a blind man could see that Wushu's cultivation method was based on earth. Therefore, Jiang Yan did not even need to think too much, and directly took out the Jiang clan's trump card, 9 Heavens Thunder Technique. At that moment, Jiang Yan, who held the thunder in his hand, was so powerful that it almost completely suppressed Wushu's limelight. Seeing this, Wushu's face suddenly revealed a trace of a sinister smile. Without hesitation, he took out another magic treasure from his Sumeru mustard seed bag, White Bone's Soul Summoning Banner. Then, with the flag in his right hand and the banner in his left hand, he continued to rush in the direction of Jiang Yan. It had to be mentioned here, there was actually a difference between a banner and a flag. A flag was hung horizontally like a national flag, while a banner was hung vertically. Horizontal as a flag, vertical as a banner. There seemed to be no difference between the two, but in reality, there was a big difference. That was because the flag was Yang and the banner was Yin. Therefore, the moment Wushu took out the White Bone Soul Summoning Banner, a black gas suddenly surged out from his body, as if thousands of vengeful spirits were flowing within. With one hand, the apricot yellow flag was mighty and righteous. With the other, the White Bone Soul Summoning Banner was awe-inspiring. Since Jiang Yan wanted to use the 5 elements to restrain him, then he might as well combine Yin and Yang, and directly surpass the 5 elements. Under the contrast of 1 good and 1 evil, 1 Yin and 1 Yang. Wushu was like a combination of gods and demons, brazenly facing the 9 heavens thunder in Jiang Yan's hands. A battle between Yuanying and Yang. Thunder against Yin and Yang earth. This battle was so exciting that it could be said to be a once-in-a-lifetime event. However, just as Xiushan Island was collapsing and the sky was darkening, Jiang Jingqing's figure quietly appeared on Qixia Peak. As the Jiang clan's only celestial being, he did not follow the old ancestor to face the great enemy together. Instead, he came here to find Jiang Yuankui. As soon as he stepped into the ancestral hall, he saw Jiang Yuankui kneeling in front of the Jiang clan's ancestral tablets with a stupefied expression. It was unknown what he was thinking. Seeing this, Jiang Jingqing couldn't help but fly into a rage. He directly grabbed Jiang Yuankui's collar and lifted him up from the ground. The Jiang clan is currently facing a great calamity. For this reason, the old ancestor did not hesitate to save up for 1,000 years. He possessed Feng Yan just to mediate with that thief for a moment. But you, as the patriarch, are unable to recover from this setback. Could it be that you want to watch as that bastard kills all of my Jiang clan's clansmen in order to resolve the hatred in your heart? For a father, what kind of blow would the pain of losing a child be? Not to mention the ordinary people, even Jiang Yuankui, who was the clan leader, had completely lost his soul under this blow. Therefore, after hearing Jiang Jingqing's reprimand, Jiang Yuankui smiled bitterly and said, "Second granduncle must be joking. Yuankui's strength is low. Even if I go, I can only stand on the side and cheer for old ancestor." Slap. Before Jiang Yuankui could finish his words, Jiang Jingqing slapped him in the face and sent him flying more than 10 meters away. He even slid on the ground for a long time before finally coming to a stop after hitting a pillar. "I don't have time to talk nonsense with you. Let me tell you, the Jiang clan is facing a great calamity. If old ancestor can't defeat that bastard, even if I have to run away before the battle, I will come back and kill you first." Hearing this, Jiang Yuankui lay on the ground without moving. It seemed that his heart was already dead. Seeing him like this, Jiang Jingqing was furious. Just as he was about to go up and hit Jiang Yuankui to wake him up, a series of shocking rumbles suddenly came from outside the house. Like an earthquake, the entire Daiyu Island trembled, and the tiles of the ancestral temple rustled and fell. Obviously, the battle had reached its climax. Since the battle was so fierce, Jiang Jingqing, who was the main force, naturally did not dare to delay for too long. Therefore, he could only stomp his foot hard and leave a sentence before turning around and flying out of the ancestral temple. Old ancestor asked me to pass on a message to you. If you care about the Jiang clan's tens of thousands of years of foundation, then stand up and think of a way to find a strong ally for the Jiang clan to solve the current crisis. Jiang Jingqing left. After a long while, Jiang Yuankui crawled up from the ground with some difficulty. Strong ally? Even though Jiang Jingqing did not say who that person was, Jiang Yuankui instantly understood the old ancestor's meaning. However, he did not act immediately. Instead, he stood where he was and seriously thought about it. In fact, Jiang Yuankui had been very clear-headed the whole time. And because he was clear-headed, he had always had a question in his heart. Everything that was happening now, was it all part of the old ancestor's plan? Perhaps the possession of Feng Yan was also part of it? This was a very scary guess, and it made Jiang Yuankui shudder. He could not be sure. He could not be sure. That was because, after all, the blood of the Jiang clan still flowed in his body. Jiang Yuankui hesitated for a while with a complicated expression. In the end, he still could not cut off the fetters that originated from the depths of his bloodline. He turned around and walked toward the back of the ancestral temple. From the perspective of communication technology, modern technology had indeed surpassed immortal cultivation techniques. Jiang Yuankui was only a diviner. Therefore, if he wanted to instantly contact Qin Shi on the other side of the world, other than a phone call, Jiang Yuankui really could not think of any other way. Fortunately, Qin Shi had left his phone number before. Otherwise, Jiang Yuankui really would not be able to call the heavens or the earth. When the phone rang, Qin Shi was busy in the courtyard counting the medicinal ingredients. He was preparing to officially start refining medicine at night after Nian Nian fell asleep. Hello? Who's this? Mr. Qin, it's me, Jiang Yuankui. As soon as the call connected, Jiang Yuankui's slightly hoarse voice sounded from the other end of the phone. Hearing this, Qin Shi immediately raised his eyebrows. After glancing at the adumbra flower, he prepared to smile and say a few words of courtesy to Jiang Yuankui. However, before he could speak, Jiang Yuankui anxiously said, "The Jiang clan is in danger. Sir, please lend us a hand." Then, Jiang Yuankui quickly recounted the situation on Daiyu Island. After hearing this, Qin Shi's face showed a hint of surprise. If they did not use an atomic bomb, even if the entire Wulian came out, they would not be able to do anything to the Jiang clan. He had already killed one heavenly general and captured 3 alive. Why was the 5th one so powerful all of a sudden? It was not that Qin Shi looked down on Bai Hong. The main reason was that the old man from the Jiang clan was too cunning. Therefore, Qin Shi did not think that the heavenly general would be able to gain any advantage from the old man. Looking at the situation now, the Jiang clan seemed to be unable to hold on any longer. Was that why they were asking him for help? Alright, you guys hold on. I'll be there soon. In any case, he had taken something good from them. Naturally, Qin Shi could not leave them in the lurch. Therefore, he agreed to Jiang Yuankui's request. He wanted to take this opportunity to see for himself. Chapter 382. After explaining the situation to Qin Roing, Qin Shi set off for Daiyu Island. As soon as he got close to the waters around Daiyu Island, the sky suddenly darkened. Thunder and lightning intertwined, and torrential rain poured down. Thick fog rolled and rose from the surface of the sea, and the sea looked as if a tsunami was approaching. The waves surged over one after another, as if thousands of soldiers and horses were screaming, charging, and fighting. From time to time, waves soared into the sky, creating splashes of water that were more than 10 feet high. It was a spectacular sight that could not be described with words. Because the Jiang family had activated the protective array, even Qin Shi could not see what was going on inside. When he forcibly broke open a crack in the array and was about to enter, a surging and violent wave of spirit chi suddenly surged out from the crack. Chen Shi only sensed it briefly, but he frowned on the spot. This was the remnant aura after the great battle. At the same time, there were two distinct waves of true origin in this aura. This meant that the battle had reached its climax, and both parties did not even bother to restrain themselves. That was why so much spirit chi had leaked out. Chen Shi could only hope that the old man could hold on for a while longer. After all, he was not here to collect the Jiang family's corpse. Thinking of this, Chen Shi couldn't help but speed up his movements. With a flash, his entire person directly entered the grand formation. As soon as he entered the array, he saw a field of wildfire, thick smoke, and dilapidated walls. Dayu Island? Where was the beautiful and spectacular sight that Chen Shi had seen when he first came here? Xioshan Island, which was located at the westernmost tip of Dayu Island, had half a mountain cut off. Many Jiang family members who were lucky enough to survive could only hold onto broken logs and cry in the sea. The island was shattered, and the mountain was flattened. The wildfire lit up the forest, and thick smoke filled the sky. The 17 islands of Dayu Island, there were only 1 or 2 that had not been affected by the great battle. It could be said that heaven and earth had lost their color, and all living things were crying out in grief. It was a scene of misery and suffering. Rumble! Rumble! The battle was not over yet. Every time Wushu and Jiang Yan clashed, the shockwaves produced by the collision of their Zhen Yuan would instantly destroy everything around them. Thunder continued to rumble, and the earth trembled violently. This scene was very similar to the carpet bombing tactics of World War II. Thus, compared to the Jiang clan's people in the sky, the Jiang clan's people with shallow cultivations below were the ones who were truly living in fear. They would never know when the next wave of attacks would befall them. They watched as their loved ones fell one after another in the aftermath of the great battle, or were directly smashed into meat paste by the dissipating true essence. The pitiful Jiang clansmen could only hug each other and cry bitterly. The Celestials couldn't protect them, and the old ancestor couldn't save them. Who else could save them? Blood flowed like a river and corpses piled up into mountains. Tens of thousands of people were in grief, their wails shaking the heavens. Looking at the tragic scenes in front of him, Chen Shi, who was used to living in a civilized society, felt a little uncomfortable for a moment. Although he had only returned for a little over a year, he felt that he had been away from that cruel world for far too long. Until this moment, he finally found the feeling he had back then. The battle between Yuanying was indeed more terrifying than he had imagined. Both of them were experts. Experts naturally didn't need to be compassionate, nor did they need to be overcautious. However, looking at the grief-stricken mortals below, combined with what he had seen and heard during this period of time, Chen Shi couldn't help but have a question in his mind. Strength and weakness were relative. Compared to humans, ants were extremely insignificant. But compared to immortal cultivators, what was the difference between an ordinary person and an ant? At this moment, Chen Shi suddenly had an epiphany and completely forgot where he was. He actually fell into deep thought just like that. Strength was divided into strong and weak. All living things were equal. Even if they were as insignificant as ants, as a life between heaven and earth, they should receive the least amount of respect. In front of humans, ants were insignificant. But in front of planets like Tianxian or Earth, weren't humans also insignificant and insignificant? Any wave of tides was enough to affect all life on this planet. The dinosaurs were extinct. The ancient immortal cultivators were lucky enough to escape. In front of heaven and earth, all living things were equal. Whether it was the ante selling vegetables on the street or him, the divine Lord of Dawn, what was the difference between the two in essence? Cultivation was a kind of detachment. In that case, what level of cultivation did he have to reach before he could be considered an absolute expert? Chen Shi floated quietly in midair. Suddenly, his heart trembled violently. Immediately after, a feeling of enlightenment rushed into Chen Shi's heart. Through the accumulated tribulations of the mystifying scripture, he was enlightened in an instant. Understanding one's heart and seeing one's nature. Enlightenment. He hadn't had this feeling for a long time. Under such circumstances, under such conditions, he could actually have an epiphany? One had to know that epiphany was a very mysterious thing. It had nothing to do with cultivation, but it was extremely important and would be of great help to cultivation. Although he didn't comprehend the true essence of the word void, for Chen Shi, this was already a great blessing. He even had a vague feeling that he might not be far from the insightful emptiness realm. Just one more step. As long as he understood the word void, he would be able to step into the insightful emptiness realm. Thinking of this, Chen Shi couldn't help but be overjoyed. He subconsciously raised his head to the sky and let out a long howl. His voice was full of joy. But this joy was obviously somewhat out of place with the atmosphere on Daiyu Island. Wushu and Jiang Yan's 5 senses were very sharp. Even though they were fighting fiercely, both of them noticed this extremely discordant howl. Mr. Chen. When Jiang Yan saw the figure in the distance clearly, he couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. One had to know that Jiang Yan had been reincarnated through possession. After several rounds of fierce fighting, his body was already somewhat overwhelmed and could explode and die at any time. When that time came, who in this huge Jiang clan would be able to stop Wushu for a moment? Therefore, after seeing Chen Shi's figure, Jiang Yan was suddenly very excited. It had to be said that the 3 words Mr. Chen did indeed have a strange magic power. After Jiang Yan blurted out these 3 words in a moment of excitement, the scene became strangely quiet. The Jiang clan's celestials all looked in the direction their ancestor was pointing. Even Wushu. He actually stopped fighting temporarily and turned to look in Chen Shi's direction. In an instant, Chen Shi had become the focus of everyone's attention. Seeing this, Chen Shi suddenly came back to his senses and finally remembered why he was here. Sorry I'm late. Chapter 383. This was how Mr. Chen, who was the center of attention, appeared in the sky above Daiyu Island. Then he flew to Jiang Jingqing's side. Perhaps it was because he had just had an epiphany, but Chen Shi was in a good mood. He even nodded at Jiang Jingqing. Seeing this, Jiang Jingqing smiled bitterly and shook his head. Mr. Chen was in a good mood. The mood of this group of people was very heavy. Hey, where's your ancestor? Is he okay? After all, Chen Shi owed him a favor. Naturally, he had to express his gratitude. But he looked left and right, but did not see Jiang Yan's figure, which was why he asked this question. I'm here. Mr. Meng, I'm very happy that you're concerned about me. Hearing this, Jiang Yan forced a smile and responded. At this time, Chen Shi finally noticed the young man beside him. If he remembered correctly, this young man was the one who wanted to take the Adumbra flower away from him. Wait a minute. This kid was not even a diviner, right? How did he become so powerful after not seeing him for a few days? Feeling the surge of true origin in Jiang Yan's body, even Chen Shi could not help but be stunned for a moment. Immediately after that, he seemed to have suddenly thought of something. He could not help but ask tentatively, bloodline possession? You're very knowledgeable, Mr. Meng. Hearing this, Jiang Yan nodded straightforwardly, confirming his guess. The so-called bloodline possession was actually a taboo technique. It went against the rules, so it was not tolerated by the world. A very simple example could be given. If a grandfather took away his grandson's body, how should the father address his son? Should he address his son's body as his father? Or should he address his father's soul as his son? No matter who it was, they would not be able to accept such a strange thing. But even so, bloodline possession was still a common occurrence. After all, compared to outsiders, the possessor and the possessor shared the same bloodline. After possession, it was naturally easier for the possessor to unleash his original strength. Looking at Jiang Fengyan, who had a young face but was extremely mature in his behavior, Jiang Fengyan felt a chill run down his spine. Chen Shi was speechless. However, this was someone else's family matter after all. As an outsider, he had no right to interfere. In fact, Chen Shi had long felt that this old man was very sinister, but he did not expect this old man to be even more sinister than he had imagined. The old man had used the soul crystal to live for thousands of years. She thought that he had taken over the body, so he could only stay in the soul crystal for the rest of his life. He didn't expect the old man to have such a trick up his sleeve. It wasn't until today that he seized his great-great-great-grandson's body. Jiang Fengyan was a good material. He could be considered to have excellent aptitude. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to take half a step into the Deva realm at such a young age. With such aptitude, if placed in the heavenly Jade domain, no matter which sect, he would be listed as a core disciple. Thinking of this, she couldn't help but come up with a guess. Could it be? The old man had predicted that with the revival of spirit qi, there was a perfect candidate for possession, so he simply took advantage of this opportunity to seize Jiang Fengyan's body openly? He trapped himself in the soul crystal and tortured himself for thousands of years, just to welcome the glory of tomorrow? What a vicious heart! What a deep mind! People who were vicious to others were not scary. People who were vicious to themselves were the ones who were truly scary. Chen Shi's mind was in a whirl, but his face did not show any abnormality. His conversation with Jiang Yan was short, so it did not take up too much time. After saying that, Shi turned his gaze to Wushu. After all, this was his real enemy. It had to be said that the atmosphere above Daiyu Island was somewhat stifling. Wushu was still holding 2 flags in his hands, flying alone not far away from the Jiang family. A dignified divine general of Tiandu was now covered in injuries, and he no longer had the sage-like aura he had before. However, even Wushu's body emitted a sense of exhaustion, let alone the Jiang clan's people. She only took a cursory glance, and found that the Jiang family's pride of 300 divine warriors had been reduced to just over 100. Moreover, they all looked dispirited, and there was even some despair and fear in their eyes. It was obvious that the Jiang family had paid a heavy price in this battle. It could be said that they had suffered a great loss. If it wasn't for his appearance that made the 2 sides stop fighting for a while, then it would not be long before. Then, Daiyu Island would be completely wiped off the map by Wushu. Alright, you guys go and rest. Leave this to me. Shi twisted his neck, and after saying that, he directly flew forward a short distance, leaving himself to face Wushu alone. This action clearly showed his attitude. From now on, Wushu's enemy was no longer the Jiang family, but him, Qin Shi, Mr. Qin. Actually, Qin Shi's idea was very simple. No matter what secrets were hidden, when the spirit energy tide appeared, Yingying would feel dizzy and sick. It was also because Yingying would feel dizzy and sick that he had to avoid this situation. How could he avoid it? Wasn't it just to disperse the spirit energy tide? Other than that, whether it was Tiandu or the Jiang family, it had nothing to do with him. In short, as long as he was on Earth, the spirit energy tide would not appear for a day. But if the spirit energy tide did not appear, how could the heavenly gate open? How would the generals of Tiandu descend on Earth? This was simply a paradox. Therefore, it was destined that Qin Shi would stand on the opposite side of Tiandu. Unless Tiandu took the initiative to hand over the heaven-bearing efficacious floating mirror so that Qin Shi could check the secrets in it and completely cure Yingying's dizziness. Otherwise, there was no way this matter could be resolved peacefully. A 9th-grade spirit treasure in each hand, where is Gao Shui Fu? Shi looked at Wushu from head to toe. After seeing that Wushu was covered in high-grade spirit treasures, he could not help but laugh and tease him. Just this alone was enough to show that Wushu's status was much higher than Baihong's. Therefore, Shi was very interested in Wushu. He wanted to bring Wushu back to the underwater cave, light a candle, prepare a whip, and interrogate him. Wushu did not speak. He had been silently sizing up Qin Shi. Even after Qin Shi spoke, the expression on his face didn't change. Seeing that he did not speak, Qin Shi asked very generously, "You guys have been fighting for so long. Do you want to rest for a while? Take some medicine to nourish your body or something?" "No need." Wushu finally spoke. Qin Shi thought that he was going to continue fighting, so he shook his right hand and the flowing cloud sword flew out from his back. "Then come, don't say that I bullied you. I'll let you have 3 moves first. Go ahead, I promise I won't fight back." After saying that, Chen Shi held the long sword in his hand and made an inviting gesture. Hearing that, Wu Shu still did not attack. Without seeing him do anything, the Wuji apricot yellow flag and the white bone soul beckoning banner in his hands suddenly disappeared, which made Chen Shi envious. Summer mustard seed bag? Tall, rich, and handsome indeed. Chen Shi thought that Wu Shu was going to change his spirit treasures. But after a while, he only saw Wu Shu rubbing his face with his hand and then showing a dispirited expression. I'm not fighting anymore, I'm already giving you Huan Tianzuan enough face. I'm tired, let's call it a day, Mr. Chen, right? My name is Wu Shu. We'll meet again someday, see you next time. Until then. Wu Shu finally returned to his previous sloppy self. In fact, he did not even think about fighting with Chen Shi, because he knew very well what he was capable of. Even if Wu Shu was in his best condition, he did not want to fight with Chen Shi, let alone now. The reason why he stayed here was mainly because he wanted to see Chen Shi. Now that he had seen him, he knew his name. It was time for him to leave. There was bound to be a day when they would meet again. As soon as he finished speaking, Wu Shu was like a pile of quicksand. He turned into thousands of grains of sand and slowly drifted away with the wind. Seeing that, Chen Shi frowned and suddenly slashed at the quicksand with his sword. Chapter 384. Under Chen Shi's watch, Wu Shu suddenly turned into a cloud of dust and dissipated in front of everyone's eyes. Chen Shi had come all the way here and had barely exchanged a few words. How could he allow this guy to escape so easily? Therefore, the moment Wu Shu's figure dissipated, Chen Shi drew his sword. As soon as the sword was drawn, the sky suddenly darkened. The long sword turned invisible, and the twilight in the sky silently closed. Heaven and earth were silent. It was as if only one person, one sword, and one grain of sand were left. This was the earth escape technique of the 5 elements. It was also the escape technique that Wu Shu was proud of. As soon as this technique was drawn, Wu Shu's entire body was like thousands of dust and gravel in the air. It was invisible and unfathomable. But it was a pity Wu Shu had underestimated Chen Shi's strength. If he had left before Chen Shi arrived, Daiyu Island would have been like his back garden. He could come and go as he pleased. Since Chen Shi was already here, it was destined that he would not be able to be as relaxed as before. Chen Shi still used the first move of the Moonlight Sword technique. The sword hid the void. Before the sword was drawn, the sword aura was hidden and not released. As soon as the sword was drawn, it was like a long river hanging upside down, soaring into the sky and into the clouds. Its speed was so fast that it was simply shocking. Jiang Jingqing was completely stunned by this sword. Even when he was chased by Chen Shi's flying sword all over the sky before, he did not feel that Mr. Chen was much stronger than he was. Until he saw this sword, Jiang Jingqing finally understood the gap between himself and Mr. Chen. It was like the gap between heaven and earth. The move was still the same move. However, in the past year or so, Chen Shi's condition had improved qualitatively. The demeanor of a divine lord was completely displayed at this moment. After Chen Shi slashed out with her sword, the sword light suddenly transformed into thousands of identical sword shadows as it flew through the air. These sword shadows didn't look very real, as if they didn't really exist in this world, so people mistakenly thought that. These sword shadows were only the refraction of light, which was why they formed the illusion of one real sword and 10,000 fake swords. It looked like a kaleidoscope. Of all the people present, only Jiang Yan knew what was good for him. Marvelous, truly marvelous. Jiang Yan let out a heartfelt sigh. At this time, the sword gleam and the thousands of sword shadows had already arrived at Wu Shu's previous location. One grain of sand, one world. One leaf, one Bodhi. Since Wu Shu was trying to split himself into thousands of clones and escape from Chen Shi's sight using the Earth Escape technique, Chen Shi decided to use the Earth Escape technique. In that case, Chen Shi could only unleash 10,000 swords simultaneously, using the real sword to lock onto Wu Shu's chi dynamic and the virtual sword to sweep through all things. Not a single grain of sand was spared. Bang! There was a silent and violent explosion. It was as if a piece of the sky had been forcefully ripped out, leaving a strange vacuum zone in the sky above Dayu Island. In this vacuum, there was no air, no dust, and even the sunlight seemed to be frozen. And this was clearly the real, a sword concealing the void. Suddenly, the sky cracked open like a broken mirror. The light in that position began to distort, and a figure appeared out of thin air in the originally empty sky. First, it was a pair of legs, then thighs, waist, chest, neck, and finally, head. Wushu's figure slowly appeared. You! Wushu stared at his own body with wide eyes, and his face suddenly revealed an expression as if he had seen a ghost. To put it bluntly, this was the ultimate life-saving technique that he relied on to survive. How could it be so easily broken by Qinshi? At this moment, Wushu was really panicking. It's still so early, my daughter hasn't even finished school, why are you in such a hurry? After twirling his sword around, Qinshi said to him with a smile. Wushu was silent. After taking a deep look at Qinshi, he said with a solemn expression, Impossible, it's impossible for someone like you to appear in the lower realm. You, where did you come from? Wushu looked at Qinshi with a strange expression. But after Qinshi heard this, she only smiled and didn't care at all. I came from Shangjing. He was born and raised on Earth, so why would he need to explain himself to anyone? Wushu did not believe him, but he did not argue with him. Instead, he quietly took out the white bone spirit summoning banner from his Sumeru mustard bag. It seemed like he had accepted his fate. Since he could not run, he could only fight. Seeing this, Qinshi nodded with a smile and signaled him to make his move. The battle was about to begin. The members of the Jiang family held their breaths and looked at them nervously. They had already changed from participants to spectators. However, just when everyone thought that Wushu was going to start fighting, Wushu suddenly did something that shocked everyone. After he took out the white bone spirit summoning banner, he slapped himself hard on the chest, causing himself to spit out a mouthful of blood. The blood stained the banner, making the patterns on the banner even more eerie. Blood sacrifice? After seeing Wushu use his blood to dye the white bone spirit summoning banner red, even Qinshi could not help but stop smiling. His expression became more serious because of this. After all, the blood that Wushu spat out was not simple. That was his blood essence. Since cultivators could unleash power beyond normal by burning their blood essence, then similarly, if one used their blood essence to feed a magic treasure, it would be able to unleash power beyond its current level. Therefore, when Wushu's blood essence splashed onto the banner, a terrifying murderous aura exploded from the white bone spirit summoning banner. In an instant, the Wushu flag was like a drop of ink in water. Countless black smoke gushed out from the flag and spread rapidly. The black smoke quickly covered the sky. At this moment, Wushu's voice sounded from the black smoke. You're giving me 3 moves, right? If that's the case, I won't be polite with you. Wushu is here, please enlighten me, mister. Following Wushu's roar, a surge of true essence surged out of the black smoke. Due to his previous promise, Qinshi could only use his sword to protect himself. His body lit up with a golden light, wanting to use it to block Wushu's attack. However, the violent impact that Qinshi imagined did not come. In his perception, the true essence in Wushu's body was like air in a balloon. Because it was so large, even the balloon burst. Then, the true origin energy surged out in all directions in a ring shape. Qinshi was stunned, because he did not understand what Wushu's move was. Could it be that he was here to perform a fairy scattering flower? Qinshi was puzzled. Suddenly, he shuddered and then suddenly came back to his senses. This guy is trying to escape. This time, it was really Qinshi's turn to be nervous. Not to mention anything else, if he really let Wushu escape from under his nose, he would lose a lot of face. Thinking of this, Qinshi immediately waved the sword in his hand. The sword light immediately shot out like the rising sun. Thousands of golden clusters of light instantly dispersed the black smoke and illuminated the entire sky. Unfortunately, Qinshi's reaction was still a beat slower. After the feint, Wusu had long disappeared from his sight. Chapter 385. Of the 36 stratagems, escape was the best stratagem. Wushu slipped away quietly in front of Qin Shi's eyes. Looking in the direction Wushu disappeared in, Qin Shi finally came back to his senses after a long while. He burned his blood essence and then put on such a grand display. In the end, it was all to escape? This was a little awkward. Qin Shi turned around and glanced at the Jiang family, only to find that everyone was looking at him expressionlessly. I'm sorry, we let him escape. It was a mistake. Since he had already escaped, it was impossible for Qin Shi to catch up no matter how much he wanted to. At this point, Qin Shi could only sheath his long sword with an awkward expression and sincerely apologize to the Jiang family. Although he did not do anything wrong. Looking at the defeated soldiers in front of him and the wildfire raging on Daiyu Island below, Qin Shi still felt a little apologetic. After all, Wushu's trip had greatly damaged Daiyu Island's vitality. Although he had arrived in time to save the Jiang family, as long as Wushu successfully escaped, it meant that this was actually a meaningless and crushing defeat. They had lost more than 100 heavenly beings, but in the end, they only managed to get the other party to escape unscathed. No matter who it was, they would not be able to accept this result. Therefore, after confirming that Divine General Wushu had successfully escaped, the Jiang family had a complicated expression on their faces. They did not dare to blame Qin Shi. After all, Qin Shi had just saved their lives. But at the same time, they could not help but curse in their hearts. If Mr. Qin had not been so arrogant just now, Wushu's head would probably have been placed in front of the ancestral tablets by now. Because of this thought, the Jiang family could not help but feel a little dejected. They even felt disheartened. 300 heavenly beings could not deal with a divine general. When this person recovered from his injuries and returned to Daiyu Island for revenge, how were the remaining 100 or so people supposed to stop him? When the time came, were they not fishes on the chopping board? Whether they were killed or cut off completely depended on Wushu's mood. Everyone's faces were clouded with worry, and their hearts were filled with anxiety. At this critical moment, perhaps only old ancestor Jiang Yan could still respond to Qin Shi with a smile. Thank you, Mr. Qin. If you hadn't arrived in time, I'm afraid the lives of this old man and the tens of thousands of Jiang clansmen on Daiyu Island would have been in danger. Such a great favor is like giving birth to a new life. Speaking to hear, Jiang Yan suddenly bowed towards Qin Shi, then said extremely solemnly, Jiang Yan is here. On behalf of the entire Jiang clan, I thank Mr. for saving my life. Since the elder ancestor had expressed his opinion, no matter how uncomfortable everyone was, they could only bow to Qin Shi and say, Thank you for saving our lives, Mr. Seeing this, Qin Shi also said politely with an awkward expression, Everyone, please rise. It's just a small matter. Everyone, there's no need to be so polite. Hearing this, Jiang Yan straightened his body, then lamented with a pained expression, After this battle, the Jiang clan's vitality has been greatly damaged. Looking at this devastated Daiyu Island, this old man's heart aches even more. All the sins were caused by this old man. This old man only hopes that this decision is not wrong. Otherwise, when this old man goes to the netherworld in the future, how can I face the ancestors of the Jiang clan? I, Jiang Yan, am the sinner of the Jiang clan. Jiang Yan was filled with grief and indignation. In a moment of agitation, 2 streams of turbid tears fell from the old man's eyes. Looking at his bloodshot eyes, even Qin Shi, an outsider, could not bear to see it, let alone these reborn juniors of the Jiang clan. Elder ancestor, you're right. Your decision is also for the sake of revitalizing the Jiang clan, and also for the sake of establishing the supreme glory of our clan in the future. The Jiang clan has not been defeated. As long as we are still alive, even if we are smashed to pieces, we will fight for a brand new future for the Jiang clan under your leadership. For the Jiang clan. Even if we are smashed to pieces, we will not retreat even half a step. F***CK the Divine General of Tiandu. In the future, if anyone dares to mention the word ascension in front of me, I will definitely not forgive him. From today onwards, The Jiang clan will definitely be at odds with Tiandu. Irreconcilable. Irreconcilable. When everyone saw Jiang Yan cry, the depression in their hearts immediately turned into endless grief and indignation. Suddenly, their morale was even higher than before. Chen Shi stared dumbfoundedly at the scene in front of him. Everyone surrounded Jiang Yan and made bold statements. Jiang Yan, on the other hand, occupied Jiang Fengyan's young body. His face revealed an expression of great comfort. The more he looked at it, the more awkward he felt. Therefore, Chen Shi couldn't help but sigh with emotion in his heart. This old fellow was really ruthless. He actually managed to win back the hearts of the people with just a few words. Although he didn't know the real purpose of Jiang Yan, Chen Shi was now convinced by this old fellow from the bottom of his heart. No matter what Jiang Yan did, at least, he dared to raise the flag and become enemies with Tiandu, right? After Jiang Yan's post-battle speech, the fighting spirit of the Jiang clan was reignited. Chen Shi was an outsider. Now that the crisis had been resolved, the Jiang clan was busy cleaning up the battlefield and rebuilding their home. He naturally couldn't stay here and be an eyesore, so he left silently. Before leaving, he also took the initiative to leave a restriction on Qixia Peak to prevent similar incidents from happening again. In fact, Chen Shi also felt a little regretful in his heart. After all, there was an old saying, if you cut the grass without removing the roots, it will grow again when the spring breeze blows. Today, he couldn't stop Wushu. Who knew what would happen in the future? In fact, with Wushu's shiny equipment, Chen Shi absolutely didn't believe that he didn't have any life-saving skills. Did he really think that Wushu was a wild chicken on the roadside that could be killed at will? Therefore, Chen Shi could only make up his mind now. If he could meet Wushu again next time, even if he used underhanded tricks, he must suppress him. Today's situation must not happen again. Chen Shi recalled what he saw today while flying back to Shangjing. It was almost time. It was time to pick up Nian Nian from school. At the same time, far in the northernmost part of the earth, a figure suddenly appeared on an iceberg floating on the sea. It was Wushu. After successfully escaping from Daiyu Island, Wushu flew all the way here in one breath. If it wasn't for the fact that he used up so much energy, he would have directly flown to the moon. This place was already remote enough. Wushu looked around. After confirming that there was no one here, he heaved a sigh of relief and sat cross-legged on the iceberg. As soon as he sat down, Wushu felt a burst of tightness in his chest. He didn't even have time to take out a pill from his sumaru mustard seed bag before coughing out a mouthful of blood. The blood splattered on the pure white iceberg. It was particularly dazzling. It was obvious that he had suffered a very serious internal injury. However, this injury wasn't caused by Chen Shi. It was caused by himself. Many animals would choose to use self-mutilation to escape when their lives were in danger. For example, geckos would cut off their tails, spiders would cut off their legs, sea cucumbers would spit out their organs, and so on. The reason why Wushu was able to escape from Chen Shi's eyes was because he used a method similar to this principle. That was blood escape. Using the blood escape would consume one's own essence blood. How important was essence blood to immortal cultivators? Wushu would never use it unless he had no other choice. He was forced into a corner by Chen Shi. However, no matter what, it was better to be injured than to die, right? At the thought of this, Wushu chuckled. He could not help but reveal a smug expression on his face. Bai Hong and Shui Xiang didn't know how to use this secret technique. He was the only one who knew how to use it. Mr. Chen, right? I'll remember you. You'll let me have 3 moves first, right? Just you wait. Next time, I'll let 300 divine generals attack you once, and then I'll let you have 3 moves first. Chapter 386. November 1st, Halloween in the West. Although many kindergartens were celebrating the Western Festival now, Donghua Gate Kindergarten did not promote the Western Festival in the park due to its pure bloodline. Therefore, for the children in the park, today was just a very ordinary day. The only thing worth noting was probably the temperature today. Because winter had arrived in Shangjing again. This year's winter was slightly later than last year, but as soon as November passed, the trees on both sides of the street shed their leaves one after another. They held up the graceful branches of the dead trees as if they were welcoming the coming winter. The cold wind blew through the corner of the street and rolled up some leaves that had not been cleared. Perhaps because the kindergarten was next to the Forbidden City, it was particularly quiet here. In the alley, pedestrians hurriedly walked by in twos and threes, as if they did not want to stay in the cold wind for a moment longer. The road outside the kindergarten was already filled with cars that came to pick up children from school. The parents sat in the cars to keep warm, and the cars breathed out heavy air. Only She stood alone in front of the gate. He was wearing a black windbreaker, and he was standing like a javelin. At first glance, She looked a bit like a security guard in front of the sales department. Ding, 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 as the pleasant bell rang, the park that had been asleep for a long time became lively again. The children were chattering about going home, and the teacher had to let them line up. Then, class by class, they came to the gate to look for their parents. Shi's side suddenly became lively. The parents scrambled to the side of the gate, wishing that they could immediately pull their children out from behind the iron gate. Shi was not in a hurry, and Yan was not in a hurry either. This was because as soon as she walked out of the classroom, she saw Shi's figure as usual. Shi's figure, like a lighthouse on the sea, even if life was like waves and tides, he would always wait there firmly, silently waiting for Yan to appear. Dad! 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 Yan stood on the steps, excitedly waving her small hands at Shi. The two brothers followed behind her, one on her left and one on her right. They looked like two incomparably loyal little guardians. The children of the older class had to walk last, so after most of the children had left with their parents, the three little fellows ran out of the school gate under the guidance of the teacher. As soon as she crossed the iron gate, she didn't even have time to hug her before the little girl very sensibly turned around and said to the teacher with a grin, "Goodbye, teacher." "Bye, Yan. Wen Ming. See you tomorrow." "Good. See you tomorrow." Unknowingly, the two brothers had developed the habit of not wanting to go to school if they didn't see Yan. Like a sponge, Qiao Yuan studied and improved herself crazily, while Gu Lao enjoyed the rest of his life. Qin Ring was in closed-door cultivation all day long, and Shi rarely showed up except to take the three children to and from school. Because Shi was busy with something important. A very, very big thing. For this, after Shi sent Yan to school every day, he had to cross the entire Pacific Ocean and go to the United States, which was far away on the other side of the ocean. Of course, Shi didn't go to the United States for fun, but for work. The adumbra flower was so precious, naturally, it couldn't be refined with an ordinary iron basin. And Shi didn't have enough materials to refine a new alchemy furnace, so refining the adumbra flower became a big problem. So after thinking about it, Shi finally decided to use the power of nature to refine the elixir. That was heaven and earth as the furnace, nature as the work, yin and yang as the charcoal, all things as the copper. Therefore, the supervolcano in Yellowstone Park was his first choice. The so-called supervolcano was a large-scale eruption volcano that could change the world's weather after eruption and even threaten human beings. Yellowstone Park was once the world's largest national park, and Yellowstone Volcano was the world's largest supervolcano. Mount Fuji was an active volcano, but it wasn't a supervolcano, so it didn't have the qualifications to enter Shi's consideration. Refining elixir was a very complicated thing. The energy cultivation elixir that he refined in the past was actually rubbish, so Shi didn't care at all. Now that he finally had the best ingredients, Shi naturally had to pay 120% attention. Configuring the prescription, screening the ingredients, analyzing the medicinal properties, choosing the furnace, and so on. After doing all this preliminary work, Shi could officially start refining the elixir. This day, December 1st, Shangjing had just welcomed the first snow, but Yellowstone Park was already covered in snow. Looking around, the dense pine forests rose and fell, and the rolling mountains were covered in morning fog. Animal footprints crisscrossed the snowy plains, and hot springs rose and fell one after another. Because the world's largest supervolcano was buried below, Yellowstone Park had a wonderful scenery that was difficult to see in other places during winter. When the warm water vapor sprayed into the cold air, the water molecules would instantly solidify into a rain of small ice pellets, forming an extremely rare geothermal fountain. So what kind of park was this? It was simply a paradise on Earth. Yellowstone Park covered an area of up to 9,000 square kilometers, one-third larger than Zhonghai's 6,000 square kilometers. Because of the need to close off the mountains to cultivate forests, the park would be completely closed at the end of October and would only reopen in mid-December. During this time, only a few scenic spots could be visited. Therefore, when Qinshi arrived at the park, there was not a single tourist in the huge park. This was not the first time he had been here. After the volcanic eruption cooled down, it would produce hard and impermeable basalt. After rainfall, it would generally produce a large lake. Therefore, the crater of Yellowstone Park was not protruding like Mount Fuji, but hidden under Yellowstone Lake. It could even be said that the entire Yellowstone Park was located on the crater of the volcano. Qinshi plunged into Yellowstone Lake, then followed the tunnel he had previously dug and quickly flew underground. The reason why it was called a supervolcano was because there was a magma reservoir with a diameter of 70 kilometers and a thickness of about 10 kilometers below the crater. In fact, a volcano was like a pressure cooker. Once the internal temperature rose to a certain level, the magma inside would instantly erupt. Qinshi set up a restriction in the magma reservoir. Then, he put all the medicinal herbs he had collected during this period of time inside, such as the adumbra flower, bloodthorn grass, ginseng flowers, and all kinds of precious medicinal herbs that could be found in the world. Rare and precious treasures were produced from the earth. With the calcination and extraction of the underground fire essence, coupled with the continuous washing of the spirit energy of heaven and earth, the medicinal properties of the medicinal herbs could be released most effectively. Qinshi used the restriction to bind the medicinal properties and continuously quenched and compressed them together. The released medicinal properties would gradually change from a gaseous state to a liquid state, and finally to a solid state. When the medicinal herbs were exhausted, it was time for the elixir to be produced. What was the most important thing in alchemy? It was neither the medicinal herbs nor the technique. It was the last step before the elixir was formed. Because this was not an ordinary Chinese medicine, the moment the elixir was produced, it was like forcibly opening the lid of the pressure cooker. Boiling hot steam would instantly rush out. What Qinshi had to do was to smoothly take the elixir out of the furnace from this boiling hot steam. It sounded very simple. But what if the steam was replaced with the spirit energy of heaven and earth? The adumbra flower's grade was very high, and the elixir it produced was at least a 9th grade elixir. Thus, the accumulation of more than 3,000 years would completely erupt the moment the furnace was opened, along with the elixir. If Qinshi did not immediately take the elixir and use a secret technique to bind the elixir, then the medicinal properties of the elixir would rapidly dissipate, turning back into spirit energy and dissipating into heaven and earth. Under the continuous burning of the earth fire, the medicinal properties of the adumbra flower were completely unleashed. Once the spirit pill was formed, the restriction would fall apart, and the compressed spirit chi of heaven and earth would explode in an instant. Its intensity would not be inferior to a large-scale spirit chi tide. In fact, it was even more ferocious and surging than the tide of spiritual energy. At the same time, it was also more threatening. Qinshi waited patiently, focusing all his attention on the ball of light. Suddenly, a slight cracking sound came from the top of the magma chamber. Crack. It was a very weak sound. Before Qinshi could react, the faint cracking noise had turned into a series of loud rumbling noises. The earth seemed to be torn apart. Immediately afterward, the volcanic passage that had been deposited for hundreds of thousands of years came alive again. The strong air pressure continued to rise, trying to find a way to vent. The mountain could not withstand the pressure, and huge cracks began to appear, spreading all the way to the surface at an extremely fast speed. The cracks grew bigger and more numerous. Countless huge rocks continued to fall from above. The moment the huge rocks smashed into the magma below, the magma boiled, and sparks flew everywhere. Qin was stunned. Until this moment, he didn't even realize what a terrible thing he was doing. The earth began to tremble. Under the pressure, countless cracks appeared on the inside of the mountain. The cracks reached the surface. In an instant, countless geothermal fountains erupted from Yellowstone Park at the same time. Because the temperature was too high, the snow on the surface began to sublimate, turning from a solid to a gas in an instant. A thick fog shrouded the park. At the same time, earthquake alarms sounded in several cities around Yellowstone Park. The tremors grew stronger and stronger. This was not an earthquake, but the supervolcano had begun to become active. Under the pressure, the weak surface of the earth began to bulge, undulating strangely like waves. Birds cried out and beasts howled. Countless animals ran out of the park, and flocks of birds flew across the sky, blotting out the sun. The only thing worth celebrating was, it was probably because Yellowstone Park was not open to tourists during this period of time. This place was freezing cold. Other than a few park staff, there were not many people. Qin was inside the magma chamber, so he could see more clearly. He saw the mountain collapse. He also saw the magma boiling. Originally, he came to pick up the medicine happily, but he did not expect to witness a volcanic eruption with his own eyes. Qin finally realized the seriousness of the matter. But just as he was about to find a way to contain the volcanic eruption, the elixir came out of the furnace without warning. The sudden burst of spiritual energy forced him to take a few steps back. Seeing this, Qin could not help but let out a long howl and immediately rushed toward the ball of light. It was not easy to wait for the elixir to come out of the furnace. If he really failed at this time, wouldn't he be depressed to death? The spiritual energy turned into gusts of wind, like sharp blades, constantly slapping Qin's body. Even if his cultivation was unparalleled at this moment, he could only barely withstand the pressure, and then slowly approach the elixir. The elixir was quietly suspended in the middle of the cave. It was like a luminous pearl, shining brightly. After such a long time of extraction, the medicinal properties were fully displayed. As soon as it came out, the magma chamber was filled with a refreshing smell. Just taking a deep breath of the aroma would make one feel refreshed and refreshed. The elixir was right in front of him. Thinking of the efficacy of this elixir, even Qin could not help but feel a little excited. As long as he took this elixir, then Ying would step into the diviner realm and condense the golden elixir. In a moment of excitement, Qin also used all his strength, and a burst of true essence energy instantly erupted from his body, not inferior to the spiritual energy tide. The energy was like a sharp knife, leading Qin all the way to the elixir. However, with every step he took, a layer of true essence in his body would be consumed. Finally, Qin flew near the elixir. The moment his fingers touched the elixir, the surging spiritual energy in the magma chamber seemed to have heard the call, and all of it converged into the elixir. The pressure suddenly disappeared. However, before Qin had time to be happy, the boiling magma below was like a fountain, and it suddenly spewed up into the sky. Why did the volcano not erupt? That was because the spiritual energy of heaven and earth filled the cave, and thus the magma was firmly pressed in the magma chamber. Once Qin took the elixir, the magma that had lost its suppression would be like a dam bursting, and it would spray out more fiercely and violently than before. This was an explosive volcanic eruption. From afar, it looked like a supernuclear bomb had been dropped in Yellowstone Park. First, a burst of strong light lit up the sky. Immediately after, a gigantic mushroom cloud slowly rose. At the same time as the mushroom cloud rose, there were countless bolts of lightning shuttling back and forth. The angry volcano spewed magma and thick smoke, and ferocious electric snakes hissed in the air. This was not a movie, but a joint performance of the sky and the earth, volcanic lightning. Chapter 389. The supervolcano erupted. At that moment, the entire world seemed to have quieted down. The crater of the volcano was like a lit-up firework. First, it emitted a cloud of smoke that covered the sky, then it suddenly exploded into the sky. In an instant, a mushroom cloud formed by volcanic ash and steam rose into the sky, almost breaking through the clouds. Dark red magma spewed out along with the billowing black smoke. The red-hot rocks were pushed into the sky and exploded like fireworks, then fell in all directions. From afar, it looked like thousands of meteors had passed by, leaving streaks of fiery red marks in the sky. At the same time, the shock waves that accompanied the explosions spread out wave after wave. Countless boulders were blown away by the strong wind, and countless trees were uprooted. The accumulated snow on the ground turned into white smoke and drifted in all directions. At that moment, all living things cried out, and the plants bowed their heads. Because sound traveled the slowest, after the shock waves exploded, the loud rumbling sound began to spread out in all directions. The entire earth was shaking violently. Magma spewed out from the crater of the volcano, black smoke filled the sky, and hot flames swallowed a large area of land. This was the anger of nature. All living things were destined to be doomed, and could only helplessly fall into this terrible disaster. This scene, it must be the so-called, the birth of a drought demon. Thousands of miles of land were barren. Starving people were everywhere, and not even a blade of grass grew. Chen Shi turned into a golden light and flew out of the thick smoke. When he saw the scene in front of him, he finally realized what he had done. The huge Yellowstone Park had become a purgatory. Magma spewed out from the crater of the volcano, spreading out wave after wave. Magma spread all over the ground, like a bright red wound, and blood was gushing out. This was definitely an accident. Chen Shi looked at the scene in front of him, dumbfounded. After he came back to his senses, he began to think about how to remedy the situation. After all, he was not a patriot. Although the United States was annoying, the people of the United States were innocent. Chen Shi's worldview was not so twisted and dark. How to remedy it? This was really a problem. Volcanic eruptions were not short-lived, but rather a continuous process. Once this hole was opened, magma would continuously gush out from the ground. This would last for at least a few hours, at most a few days, or even a few years. Rain could not extinguish a volcano. This was because volcanoes were not only found on land. There were also volcanoes under the sea. Even the sea could not extinguish a volcano, let alone a few heavy rains. Chen Shi looked at the crater with a worried expression. But Jiang Yan had no intention of lighting a light at all. He continued to walk forward without stopping. He did not know how far he had walked before a faint light appeared at the end of the tunnel. Seeing this, a faint smile immediately appeared on Jiang Yan's face. At the end of the tunnel was a hall. There was only a faint green light source inside. From afar, it looked like a will-o'-the-wisp. It wandered in the hall while emitting a dim light. The moment Jiang Yan stepped into the hall, an old voice sounded in the hall. Who's here? It's me, Jiang Yan. The young man's voice was good. The energetic voice suddenly formed a sharp contrast with the lifeless voice. And as soon as Jiang Yan's voice fell, the hall that had been silent for a long time seemed to come alive again. Jiang Yan! Jiang Yan! Jiang Yan! Countless different voices sounded in every corner of the hall. Just like the many spectators sitting around, the moment they saw Jiang Yan appear, they cheered in unison. But these voices sounded like the voices of dried corpses. It was dry and shriveled, and at the same time, it was a bit harsh and hoarse. Jiang Yan seemed to enjoy the feeling of being the center of attention. After a while, he raised his arms and signaled for everyone to be quiet. The cheers stopped abruptly. At this time, Jiang Yen faced the center of the hall and said slowly, "I'm sure you all know what's going on outside, so now I just want to ask, the oath back then, is it still valid now?" After that, Jiang Yen began to look around. But no one answered him. The entire hall was silent. It was quiet and empty. It was as if he was the only living person in the room. Jiang Yen stood in the center of the hall and waited silently. After a long while, the old voice sounded again. "How can the oath of the 9 serenities be taken lightly? Since you have decided to come out, we will not continue to endure here. Go ahead and make the arrangements. If there is no doubt, I am willing to respect Jiang Yen as the co-leader of the 9 serenities and lead us to fight against Tiandu. Do you have any objections?" As soon as this question was asked, there was a sound of agreement in the hall. Seconded. 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 Just like the company's board of directors, Jiang Yen was officially elected as the new CEO of the 9 serenities. There were 9 levels of heaven and 9 levels of earth. There was Tiandu above and the 9 serenities below. The 2 words, 9 serenities, were the fundamental reason why Jiang Yen dared to go against Tiandu. For this, he was even willing to sacrifice the entire Jiang family and offer up all the remaining celestials on Daiyu Island for the 9 serenities to take. Because what he wanted. One half would be given to his father-in-law and the other half would be given to Madame Jiang. His sister-in-law had already eaten the heaven and earth treasure before, so she had indigestion. Therefore, Chen Shi directly ignored Qin Shueqing this time. As for Big Cat and Big Head, their cultivation levels were too low, so it was enough for them to eat some energy cultivation pills. Thinking of this, a name suddenly popped up in Chen Shi's mind. Lin Xian. After such a long time, Lin Xian should have stepped into the middle stage of the qi refinement realm, right? Should he cut Madame Jiang's portion in half and give half to her? Chen Shi seriously thought about this problem. As he thought about it, he unknowingly returned to Shangjing. During this period of time, as long as he sent Nian Yan to school, Chen Shi would immediately go home to accompany Qin Ruing to cultivate. Since he was already out today, why not go to school and see how Nian Yan's class looked like? Therefore, Chen Shi immediately turned around and flew toward Donghua Gate Kindergarten. Nian Yan's class today was really interesting. It was a theme class. The content of the theme was My Mom and Dad. This was the most common class in kindergartens. It was mainly to guide children to understand themselves and others correctly, to develop a close and cooperative attitude toward others and society, and to learn the preliminary interpersonal skills. Since the correct child wanted to get to know others, the first thing to do was to start with the people around the child, which was their parents. That was why today's class was held. Previously, the teacher had already taught the children how to draw a family portrait, so today they picked up their own painting and introduced their family members to everyone in turn. The content of the class was actually quite simple. It was nothing more than the teacher asking questions, and the children standing up to answer. Of course, the questions were also very simple. For example, who is the person in the painting? What does it have to do with you? Is it good for you? What do they like to do the most? The children stood up one by one to answer. Chen Shi hid outside the classroom and listened to every word with great interest. Finally, it was Nian Yan's turn to stand up. The little girl did not have stage fright at all. She pointed at the person in the painting and answered the teacher's questions generously. When the teacher asked her, "What does Dad like to do the most?" the little thing opened its mouth and replied, "Daddy loves to cook the most. Dad's cooking is delicious. I like Dad's cooking." Then do you like Dad's cooking more? Or do you like Dad more? After the teacher threw out a question that she hadn't asked before, the little girl was stunned on the spot. She didn't seem to expect the teacher to ask such a question at all. So after hesitating for a moment, the little girl frowned and whispered softly, "I like both. Dad's cooking is delicious. I like Dad." The moment he heard this sentence, the expression on Chen Shi's face was very rich. "So if your father doesn't know how to cook, you won't like him?" The little girl's answer wasn't wrong, but it wasn't perfect. After the teacher's guidance, she finally realized the importance of her father, so she quickly nodded and affirmed, "Even if Dad's cooking isn't good, I like Dad." Children's words carried no harm. It was actually quite interesting to listen to children talk when they had nothing to do. After the little girl sat down, it was the brothers' turn. Because they were twins, the two of them drew a picture together. The teacher asked questions as usual, but she didn't expect to make a mistake here, and that was, she didn't find out the child's family situation clearly. Therefore, when the teacher casually asked who was the father, the brothers exploded on the spot. "We don't have a father." Old Gu didn't teach them this, and the old man wasn't so petty. In fact, it was Gu Yao who taught them this. Perhaps it was because she quarreled with Xia Kaiji when she was alive, so Gu Yao had been holding back her resentment after she died, so she would instill this idea in the brothers from time to time. Of course, they had to listen to what their mother said. So, they didn't have a father. When the brothers shouted this sentence in unison, the teacher knew that something bad had happened. Sure enough, as soon as the brothers finished speaking, the other children were surprised and started to talk about it. "Teacher, is he a wild child without a father? Mom told me before. If I'm taken away by bad people, then I'll lose my parents and can only become a wild child." Wild child? He's a wild child. Wild child. In recent years, the divorce rate had been increasing, and the impact of parents' divorce on children was definitely the most profound and heavy. This was a sensitive topic. Therefore, the kindergarten teacher paid attention to this issue, and even specifically investigated the family situation of each child before entering school. Chen Shi didn't think much at that time, and directly said the names of Xia Kaiji and Gu Yao. He never thought that the brothers wouldn't recognize this father at all. Chen Shi was seriously thinking about the child's education, but he didn't notice he hadn't been in seclusion for a long time to seek a breakthrough. He clearly had an epiphany some time ago on Daiyu Island. Now, he only needed to concentrate on seclusion, and the day he came out would be the day he reached insightful emptiness. But even so, Chen Shi still didn't plan to go into seclusion. Because he had to pick up Nian Nian from school every day, cook for Nian Nian, and play with Nian Nian. These trivial matters took up too much of his time, and made him live more and more like an ordinary person. The life of an ordinary person was trivial, nothing more than some household chores. He could even do nothing all day, just stay outside Nian Nian's classroom and watch his daughter grow up day by day. Actually, to put it bluntly, in his current state, he didn't deserve to be a cultivator at all. Cultivation didn't just fall from the sky, it had to be accumulated bit by bit. It was also because of this that Qin Xueqing sometimes felt very strange. Did Qin Shi really not need to cultivate? Nian Nian was very cute. But because of Nian Nian, did he really have to completely give up on cultivation? As a qualified martial arts fanatic, her sister-in-law really didn't understand Qin Shi's approach, so she also talked to Qin Shi. In this regard, Qin Shi's attitude was more resolute than she imagined. Nian Nian was indeed more important than cultivation. If he had to choose between Nian Nian and cultivation, Chen Shi would also choose the former without hesitation. You say it's trivial, but I say it's deep and meaningful. Probably only Qin Shi himself could understand the meaning behind it. You're under too little pressure. This was the last sentence Qin Xueqing said to Qin Shi before she went into seclusion. Because in her opinion, Qin Shi was simply a nouveau riche. Once he had a little money, he began to forget himself. He was busy taking the child around all day and didn't care about his own career at all. One had to know that his current stability came from his previous accumulation. Once these accumulations were exhausted, was he going to take the child and sell vegetables on the streets? This was the difference in values. To be honest, based on the amount that Jiang Yan had consumed, it was probably not as effective as directly swallowing the adumbra flower. Therefore, even if Qin Shi used her but to think, She knew that the old man must have other motives for coming to her door today. All right, you don't have to be so polite with me. She did not have the time to talk nonsense with him, so he asked directly, tell me, why did you come all the way here? Hearing this, the smile on Jiang Yan's face became even more cheerful. Actually, it's nothing much, I just wanted to come out for a walk and pay you a visit. At this point, Jiang Yan's gaze fell on the couplet in the middle of the main hall. The heavenly gate is broken, the river opens, the jade water flows east. His gaze did not linger for long, then he put on a rather emotional expression and sighed. White clouds for 1,000 years, the sky is long. Look at this world, where does it look like it used to? When I came here, I even took that big guy called an airplane. If I didn't see it with my own eyes, I definitely wouldn't believe it. Now, even mortals can ride the clouds and travel thousands of miles in a day. It's just like what the ancestors said, a day in the mountains is 1,000 years in the world. I think it's time for Daiyu Island to change its philosophy. The Jiang family can't always live in the past. We should try to integrate into the present. The old man was a chatterbox, and once he opened his mouth, he would not stop muttering. After listening for a while, she felt a headache coming on, so he found an excuse to send him out. No wonder everyone said that the older a person was, the more long-winded they became. This old man had been holding it in for thousands of years. If he really let him continue, wouldn't he talk for 3 days and 3 nights? All right, then I won't disturb you. Have a good rest, I'll go to the Great Wall again. Ha! Jiang Yan stood in the alley and waved goodbye to Qin Shi with a smile. After Qin Shi chuckled, he didn't even bother to exchange pleasantries, and directly closed the door. Bye-bye to you. Jiang Yan didn't feel offended at all. When he turned and walked out of the alley, there was even a faint smile on his face. After that, Jiang Yan strolled leisurely on the streets, looking around from time to time. He looked like a tourist who had just arrived in the city. However, just as Jiang Yan walked out of the main street, a figure suddenly appeared beside him. Jiang Yan glanced at him and said coldly, "There are people coming and going here, can't you wait until there's no one before you appear?" Hearing this, that person said indifferently, "They're just a bunch of ants, so what if they see us? They'll only think that their eyes are playing tricks on them." Enough. Jiang Yan seemed to be quite dissatisfied with this person's approach, so his face turned cold on the spot. The last time the two of them complained in the classroom that they didn't have a father, so Qin Shi wanted Xia Kaiji to attend the Christmas party in person, hoping to ease the estrangement between father and son. After all, blood is thicker than water. When Qin Shi proposed this idea, although Gu Lao still felt a little uncomfortable in his heart, he did not speak out against it. On the other hand, the reaction of the two brothers was obviously a bit too extreme. "We don't have a father." "There isn't. We don't want daddy. I just want my mother." The two brothers said one after another, and no matter what, they refused to acknowledge this father. This made Xia Kaiji, who was hiding outside the tea house, so sad that he shed tears. When he received Qin Shi's call, Xia Kaiji was full of joy, thinking that Gu Lao had finally forgiven him. Unexpectedly, the children actually refused to acknowledge him. How could Xia Kaiji not feel sad? Qin Shi tried to persuade the two brothers, but how could children easily give in when they were stubborn? Whoever tied the bell should untie it. Qin Shi suddenly thought of Gu Yao, so he used the soul crystal to directly summon Gu Yao's soul back. After this period of recuperation, Gu Yao more or less recovered some of her consciousness. After being summoned by Qin Shi, she quietly floated over the tea house and saw everything that happened in front of her with her own eyes. Gu Lao sat in the booth sullenly. The two brothers stood on the side crying endlessly. Xia Kaiji hid in the corner and silently wiped his tears. From the day she passed away, this happy family had already been shattered. Gu Yao was just an ordinary person, without the support of a profound cultivation base. Even with Qin Shi's help, how long could her soul last? 3 years? 5 years? Or 10 years? In the end, she would disappear from the world, just like water evaporating. Not a single trace of her could be found. She was gone, but the children were still there. Even after 10 years, they would only be 15 or 16 years old teenagers. Gu Lao was already old. Did he really want them to grow up alone like wild children, without anyone to rely on? Gu Yao was persuaded by Qin Shi, and she finally figured it out. After the resentment that had shrouded her heart for a long time dissipated, her soul seemed to be a little purer. Then, Gu Yao quietly came to the two brothers. She didn't know what she said to the two brothers, but they quickly quieted down and obediently followed Qin Shi out of the tea house, standing in front of their biological father again. "Daddy?" The two brothers hesitated for a long time, and then finally called out, "Daddy." The moment he heard these two words, the man who was shining in the workplace finally couldn't hold it anymore. He knelt on the ground, his hands tightly hugged the two brothers. Because of a moment of excitement, Xia Kaiji actually let out a whimper. However, he was tactful and didn't try to talk to Qin Xueqing. After greeting her, he continued to whisper with the two brothers. Xia Kaiji didn't strike up a conversation with Qin Xueqing, but Wang Junqing and Zhao Ziyu couldn't hold it anymore. In front of a peerless beauty, as a normal man, how could he not let his imagination run wild? What's more, the two of them had always felt that they were superior. They were rich and powerful, so naturally, they wouldn't shrink back just because Qin Xueqing showed a sour face. "Hello, are you Nian Nian's aunt?" Wang Junqing tried to talk to Qin Xueqing with the help of the child. However, before he finished speaking, Qin Xueqing said coldly, "Not interested." After that, Qin Xueqing closed her eyes directly and sat in the classroom with her eyes closed. Wang Junqing was given the cold shoulder and had no choice but to get together with Zhao Ziyu resentfully. Although the two of them were nearly 10 years apart, they had the same bad ideas. Therefore, after giving Wang Junqing a look, Zhao Ziyu secretly took out his cell phone and prepared to secretly take a photo of Qin Xueqing for investigation. However, the moment Zhao Ziyu turned on the camera, a stream of vital essence hit the cell phone, causing the screen to turn off. Zhao Ziyu fiddled with the cell phone for a long time and found that it couldn't be turned on. He had to take a deep look at Qin Xueqing, trying to remember her appearance. Qin Xueqing naturally knew what he was doing, so she opened her eyes and prepared to teach Zhao Ziyu a lesson. However, at this moment, a burst of cheerful music suddenly sounded in the classroom. Ding ding dang, bell ding dang, how happy we are skiing, we sit on the sleigh. Ding ding dang, bell ding dang, how happy we are skiing, we sit on the sleigh. The moment the accompaniment of ding ding dang sounded, all the children in the class sang together with the teacher. This was a surprise prepared by the teacher for the parents. The moment the music sounded, the Christmas lights in the classroom were all lit up. After the teacher took out the Christmas spray and sprayed it on the glass, the atmosphere in the classroom was suddenly pushed to the highest point. Every child's face was filled with the most enthusiastic smile. Since it was a parent-child activity, naturally parents and children had to play games together. The content of the game was very simple, which was to ask parents to accompany their children to make a Christmas card. Looking at the scissors, glue, colored pens, and socks on the table, Qin Xueqing's expression froze on the spot. When had she ever made these things in her life? But she had no choice. She had already promised Qin Shi that she would take care of Nian Nian for him. After saying that, the little girl patted her school bag like a treasure. It seemed that she had high expectations for this greeting card. Qin Shi had lied to her that her mother was sick, and the little girl had always kept this matter in her heart. Patience needed more care and attention. This 5-year-old child had already learned how to care for others. Qin Xueqing fell silent. She gently stroked the little fellow's head, but didn't say a word. Because she finally understood, What exactly was his sister searching for back then? 10,000 Holy Valley was too cold. The stubborn feudal clan rules restricted her thoughts. So all along, she only had one pursuit in her heart. That was to cultivate, cultivate, and cultivate again. Why cultivate? To ascend. But wasn't ascension another form of liberation? It was only at this moment that Qin Shueqing truly saw her own heart clearly. She seemed to be strong and decisive, but in fact, she was much weaker than Qin Ru. At least, her sister could violate the clan rules in order to pursue what she wanted, but she could only numb herself by cultivating day and night. Just like what Chen Shi said, humans had 7 emotions and 6 desires. This was an unavoidable fact. If one extinguished their emotions and desires, would they still be human? Looking at Nian Yan's innocent and beautiful smile, Qin Shueqing suddenly felt enlightened. She closed her eyes, and the vital energy in her body suddenly began to flow slowly. Under her influence, a faint breeze suddenly blew through the originally closed doors and windows of the classroom. The wind blew the paper on the picture album on the table, and also gently brushed the faces of all the children. No one noticed that something was wrong with her. This woman with exceptional talent and excellent aptitude. She actually had an epiphany just like that. At this moment, Chen Shi had also changed and returned to the classroom. He noticed that Qin Shueqing was acting strangely, so he immediately set up a restriction to ensure that her epiphany would not be disturbed by the outside world. "Dad, what's wrong with Auntie? Auntie is tired. Let her rest for a while. She'll be fine soon." "Then let's speak softly. Don't disturb Auntie." "Good girl, you're sensible." His sister-in-law had an epiphany. After the Christmas party ended, she went home and shut herself in. The secular world tempered her heart, and she took it with equanimity. The world was full of disturbances, and her heart reflected the secular world. Chen Shi just casually gave some advice, but he didn't expect Qin Shueqing to understand it completely. Chen Shi didn't know whether to laugh or cry about this. After all, this question was obviously beyond the scope of the syllabus. Perhaps this was what they meant by, "Flowers planted with the intention do not bloom, but willows planted without the intention do." Ever since she found the Earth Soul, Qin Shueqing's cultivation level shot up like a rocket.